Chapter 227. Ice-cold, frozen earth replaced the collapsing shrine. As the enemy of this world, Omdoroken was now viewed as an enemy by the entire world. Icicles would suddenly rise, ice storms would descend without any warning, and even a rock that he accidentally kicked would end up landing on his head. When the world was filled with hostility toward him, it also seemed to be treating him as an enemy. This wasn't something I intentionally created. It was simply because I, the creator of this world, viewed him as an enemy. This world naturally expressed its anger. Although this wasn't a life-threatening threat to him, in a world filled with hostility, he would need to be careful not to trip while walking or choke to death while drinking water. His current world wasn't complete, and the only element that could be affected was ice and snow. Perhaps it wouldn't be a threat to immortal Orkan, who had already created his own world, but it was difficult to avoid the hostility and attacks that would distract him. Damn it! Come out of your turtle shell if you dare. The furious Omdoroken never expected that he, who was famed for his outstanding defense, would actually have a moment where he would call someone else a turtle shell. But sometimes fate was just so ironic. This time, it was his turn to be the king of defense who was completely helpless against his enemy's defense. His seemingly fragile ice armor was covered in deadly blue flames. It was obvious that he couldn't even touch the ice that covered his entire body. Even if Omdoroken's fists weighed thousands of kilograms, he didn't know where to hit. Come hit me if you dare. His opponent actually dared to provoke him. Only now did he regret that he hadn't put more effort into strengthening his earth magic. In this abnormal world, it was impossible for him to gather earth elemental power to form powerful offensive spells. Even if he wanted to dig a hole in the ground to throw at his opponent, he discovered that the ground was filled with ice. When he tried to forcefully dig it up, it mysteriously melted into water. In this world filled with hostility, Omdoroken had suffered quite a bit. He had to be extremely careful with every step he took. Otherwise, he might trip at any moment. The sudden trembling and collapsing of the ground was even more troublesome to deal with. But in this world, my opponent suddenly displayed a mystical transformation. He had angel wings and demon feet and scales. It was already ridiculous enough that such a mystical creature that was a combination of order and chaos existed. Not only that, after transforming, my opponent's combat strength increased exponentially. The surrounding ice and snow turned into icicles in his hands. With a light pull, hundreds of icicles turned into shotguns. Under his control, the entire land of ice and snow turned into a field of ice and snow turrets. In Omdoroken's eyes, the most dangerous thing was still the dazzling frozen flames that flickered with a bewitching blue light. Just being touched by a little bit of it was enough to cut off a piece of flesh. Yet, that guy didn't hesitate to throw an ice sword that was covered in freezing flames at him. This was simply an insult to him as a martial arts master. As an experienced warrior monks, swatting away arrows was the most basic of basic. For Omdoroken, even if hundreds of elven archers attacked him at the same time, he could still easily swat away all the arrows without taking any damage. This was obviously a throw from a layman. He could even close his eyes and dodge it. Even if that ice is dangerous, it'll be fine as long as I don't touch it. But the strange thing was that the ice sword, which shouldn't have been threatening at all, suddenly sped up the moment it reached him. Damn it! What did you do? Even though there was no change in the ice sword's speed, the speed of the ice sword was sometimes slow and sometimes fast. And just when he felt that he could dodge it, the ice sword would suddenly speed up and brush past him. Before the icy flames could spread, the furious Omdoroken tore off another piece of his flesh and roared angrily at me. However, my reply was to throw even more flying swords. In Omdoroken's eyes, the flying swords actually sped up several times. The sudden increase in speed caused him to lose confidence in dodging the ice sword. He leaped up and dodged the ice sword, but unfortunately, the ice sword still managed to hit him. Misjudgment? All kinds of acceleration have signs. It's impossible for me to misjudge. In that case, it's not that the ice sword sped up, it's that I've slowed down. Immortal Lorcan's angry roar seemed rather comical in my eyes. In my ears, his roar had already transformed into a "I'm the one that's slowed down. What did you do?" comedy. Not only his voice, even his movements were like an old movie being played on a broken CD player. He was sometimes slow and sometimes fast. At this point, he was already deeply poisoned. Part of his existence and concept had already been returned to zero. Absolute zero was a concept unique to the mortal plane. At that temperature, even the tiny ions that made up matter would stop moving, and all energy would return to zero. That was why it was called absolute zero. But in this world, what made up matter weren't atoms, molecules, or other basic particles. Instead, it was basic elemental unit. And the so-called absolute zero temperature of -273 degrees Celsius was actually quite easy for ice grandmasters to reach. In fact, there were even creatures that could live freely at -500 degrees Celsius. However, divine sins were just that, abnormal. They didn't create low temperatures. Instead, they guided the basic elemental units that made up your body to the lowest point possible, reaching a state that was theoretically impossible to achieve. In the world of Aichi, which didn't even have the concept of absolute zero, such an existence shouldn't have been born. Frigid Maw is a symbiotic existence of souls. Did he obtain this concept from me? Every abomination was an error of the world. If this error were to spread and lead to a chain reaction, the entire system, world, might perish. This was also the reason why abominations were viewed as public enemies. Obviously, directly using ice flames in the mortal plane would be suicidal. However, I had also found other ways to use this ability. A small amount, so small that it's impossible to detect. Use normal ice to envelop it, dilute it, and let it slowly flow out, just like how milk is mixed into coffee. After my ice chill evolved into death chill, and with the addition of these additional effects, I finally reached the peak after my second evolution. Hibernation chill. This effect is added to any ice elemental attack. Every attack will slow down the target's speed by 1%. This effect can be stacked and cannot be avoided. But if you stop stacking, this effect will automatically disappear after 10 minutes. This seemed like a rather useless ability, and it was even worse in general usage. However, only those who truly tested it would know how terrifying it was. This slowing effect was actually the process of guiding the target to absolute zero. During this process, the target wouldn't notice at all, but the effect had already taken effect. The target would now be isolated from the normal timeline of time. Your senses and reactions have all unknowingly slowed down. For a warrior, slowing down their reactions by 0.1 seconds is already fatal. 0.1 seconds is enough to kill them, not to mention that you've already been slowed down by more than half in your current state. Right now, you can feel that the flow of time in the outside world is sometimes fast, sometimes slow. This means that your physical body's perception of time has been completely destroyed. No, I should say that you're already living in your own time. Although I said this, Amdarokan still had a confused expression. This final test proved that he was already deeply poisoned. Perhaps my words were nothing more than high-speed noise in his ears. "What are you doing? What are you saying?" I chuckled. If the explosive, ice chill of calamity was a venomous poison that could instantly kill someone, then this hibernation chill was a slow poison that would make someone fall into eternal sleep without them even realizing it. The first time he was hit by an attack that was infused with ice chill, his sense of time was already messed up. 1 second too fast, 1 second too slow. For a warrior monks who had such a strong sense of battle rhythm, this was definitely a fatal injury. Later on, he even foolishly tried to block the arrows with his bare hand. That 1 second of mistake was a mistake. 1 arrow, 2 arrows, several dozen arrows. Amdaroken became a target for arrows. It was also thanks to his ruthlessness that he dug himself into the ground. However, even though he eliminated the instant death effect of the ice chill of calamity, the effects of the hibernation chill had multiplied even more. By now, his sense of time was probably 3 times slower than a normal person's. In other words, my 3 seconds were probably only 1 second in his eyes. This was already the result of his astonishing magic defense. But since things had already reached this point, the rest was quite simple. I spread my wings. The transformation that I had been preparing for this entire time gave me enough power to fight against him. Now that I was like a trapped tiger in a cage, all that was left was the final harvest. Snap. With a snap of my fingers, the freezing flames on my ice armor disappeared without a trace. All the freezing flames had gathered on the ice magic sword that had brought me such a calamity. My ice armor made Amdaroken's attacks useless, but it also gave me a tremendous amount of pressure. The coldest ice stuck to my body, and my body was already weak from losing a lot of blood. The rapid loss of body temperature caused me to lose all feeling in my limbs. The loss of body temperature and stamina made me dizzy, and I had a splitting headache. Even if I removed my ice armor right now, being covered in frostbite would be the best possible outcome. The thing that gave me the greatest pressure was still the freezing flames on my ice armor. After all, it was only the coldest ice, and not the hardest ice. It was impossible for me to create the hardest ice. If Amdaroken went all out and tried to take me down with him, it would definitely shatter in a single blow. It would be fine if it only shattered, but if the shattered freezing flames stuck to my body, I would probably directly give up on healing myself. My seemingly all-out suppression was actually a gamble. I gambled that his elemental magic hadn't reached the point where he could forcefully control elemental magic in a place with no elemental power. I gambled that he was cautious enough to not risk his life unless he was at the end of his rope. I gambled that my current display of power had scared him, making him not confident in being able to kill me in a single blow. I couldn't help but gamble. The difference in power between us was far too great. Even if I used all of my schemes, the difference in power was still too great. I still gambled on the final missing piece of the puzzle. I saw it. I won the gamble. Amdaroken would hesitate, dodge, and search for an opportunity to counterattack. However, this was exactly what I wanted. I needed time for the hibernation chill to accumulate. Although the flames on the surface were dangerous, they wouldn't kill many people. The seemingly gentle pool was actually filled with the corpses of countless skilled swimmers. And now, the moment that Amdaroken gave up on the chance to risk his life, he had already lost his only chance at victory. Now that things had come to this, I wouldn't give him the chance to die together with me. I took a deep breath. My ice armor had already shattered into ice shards. They would only hinder my actions in the upcoming battle. I spread my wings, got close, and swung my sword. This time, there was no clash of sword and fist. Amdaroken wasn't going to wait for his death. Since he reacted in advance, he was 2 seconds faster than me. However, being too fast or too slow would result in the same result. His fist missed, while my heavy sword infused with the hibernation chill viciously slashed at his remaining arm. The blue color spread once again. Crack. Despair flashed in Amdaroken's eyes. Amdaroken was truly ruthless. He actually directly bit off his own arm. But at this point, when that blue sword of ice and snow was placed on his neck, he knew that he was done for. Just as I was about to swing my sword down, the brave and fearless Amdaroken spoke up. "Don't kill me. I'm willing to make you my lord and become your most loyal servant. The wealth I've accumulated is enough to make even the wealthiest emperor die of shame. I know the endless secrets and knowledge of this world. Even the god of magic doesn't know as much as I do. And even if I lose my status as the earth elemental god, I'm still the strongest elemental lord. My power level is definitely not weak. As long as I have enough time, I'll become even stronger. Killing me won't bring you any benefits, but becoming your servant will bring you endless wealth. Patiently listening to Amdaroken's intermittent begging for mercy was a test of one's patience. However, the more I listened, the happier I became. In the end, I even laughed out loud. Subduing an elemental god? That sounded quite impressive. Obtaining the wealth that an elemental god had accumulated for countless years? That sounded like a great deal. Having an elemental god as a fighter and servant? That was both practical and worthwhile. Killing Amdaroken would only be a way to vent my anger, but making him my slave would bring me endless benefits. No matter how I looked at it, this seemed like a great deal. For someone like me who was used to calculating benefits, it seemed that I had already made up my mind. I laughed. Seeing that I was laughing, he also laughed. No. And then, his face instantly paled. You want to survive? That's only natural, but do you know how many people died in that earthquake of yours? How many people died in the war that you started? Amdaroken's eyes were rather blank, as if he didn't know why I was bringing this up at such a time. 376,452 people died in the earthquake, and at least 2 million people died in this war. In that case, I can understand that you want to survive, but I want to ask you, when you killed them for money, did you ask them if they wanted to survive? How can an ant talk to me? Amdaroken still wanted to argue, but I had already lost my patience. Just cleaning up the corpses under the rubble after the war took an entire month. I could still hear all the tragedies and the cries of my loved ones. Now, a criminal was right under my sword, and he dared to treat my kin like ants. How could I possibly control my emotions? Ants? Ha, that's right, we're indeed not as powerful as you gods. You're undying and powerful, while we're short-lived and weak. Why can't you damned bastards spare us? Why is it that even though you're clearly so powerful, you always drag us mortals into your battles as cannon fodder? We people of the mist only want to live in peace. Why do you have to repeatedly destroy our home? It's been like this for more than 300 years, and it's been like this for more than 200 years, and it's still like this year. You're forcing our country to collapse, and our people to live in constant danger. Did we people of the mist offend you? Can't you noble gods have some kindness? If you want to fight, go fight by yourselves. Don't drag us into suffering, all right? Why can't you spare us? Why don't you go fight that damned holy war by yourselves? Why do you foolish existences have the right to be called gods? Why don't you repent even now? Are mortals nothing more than ants that you can casually stomp to death in your eyes? We're humans, not ants. My angry roar was still echoing in this space. Countless echoes were growing louder and louder. The wind was howling, the icebergs were roaring, and the plains were echoing. Their angry roars represented the will of the entire world. Every voice was angrily questioning Amdaroken, but he still didn't repent at all. As long as you spare me, I'll make it up to you. I can understand your anger at the loss of your wealth. As long as you spare me, I'll make it up to you 10 times the amount you lost. Besides, mortals live quickly, very quickly, that's right, in their eyes, mortals were nothing more than ants that reproduced incredibly quickly. Dying in battle for the gods was a supreme glory to begin with. What did their own lives matter to them? And so, I laughed out of extreme anger. And so, I swung my sword down. Sword light flashed, and that noble god's head flew into the air. The eyes of the fallen head were still filled with disbelief. But I raised this head that was currently turning into stone and declared to the entire world that I had fulfilled my oath. I, Roland Mist, swear that no matter who you are or how noble your status is, as long as you dare to trample on my people's territory and kill my people, no matter where you hide, I'll find you and kill you. Forgive. Never. Forgive? Never. Chapter 228. The severed head transformed into pitch-black rocks that gradually began to corrode. The parts of the head that were covered in eternal ice were also too dangerous for me, so I could only leave them here. The nightmarish stone giants finally collapsed. What followed was a storm of earth elemental energy. They wailed in sorrow and sang loudly. Omdoroken has died. This dimension has lost its master. The earth elemental tide furiously spread this news. After losing the earth elemental throne and elemental god, the earth elemental plane's dimensional door lost its barrier. The earth elemental tide that had always transported elemental energy to the other planes actually began to flow backwards, causing a violent sandstorm to sweep across the entire plane. This was the final madness. At that moment, all existences at the semi-god level and above received the explosive news that an elemental god had died. The earth elemental plane and elemental god's position were now empty. He was currently searching for a new master. Omdoroken is truly dead? Completely dead? It had been far too long since an elemental god had died. It was impossible to verify whether or not Omdoroken had a predecessor. All the earth elemental lords had voluntarily retreated as soon as the divine sins appeared. They had been anxiously waiting for news from the battlefield in their own homes, but now they had confused expressions as they received news from the earth elemental plane. Then they were filled with extreme joy. This mountain that has been pressing down on me for tens of millions of years has finally fallen. I can finally ascend to the top. But right after that, I received another piece of news that made me not know whether to laugh or cry. The earth elemental throne had completely collapsed, and the earth elemental tide in every plane was beginning to flow backward. A new earth elemental throne was currently being formed, and a new elemental god would likely only appear after the earth elemental throne was formed. Setting aside the earth elemental lords who were feeling all sorts of emotions, the ones who were the most unable to accept this would probably be the wind elemental god Kamdarin and the water elemental god Alos. Enemies were usually the ones who understood each other the best. They knew how powerful Immortal Orkan was, and when they found out that Roland, who was only at the gold rank, actually went to fight Immortal Orkan alone, although they didn't say anything on the surface, in their hearts, they had already regarded Roland as a dead man who overestimated himself. In their eyes, no matter what achievements Roland had achieved in the past, it was just a flash in the pan of a mortal. In the end, it was only a temporary glory, a fleeting cloud. Rookies were always the center of attention, but only evergreen trees were worthy of respect. In their long years, they had seen many heroes with astonishing talent and omnipotent geniuses, but the immortals who could live for thousands or even tens of thousands of years were always few and far between. To them, those who lived to the end were the ones who were truly worthy of respect. The Eagle of Asolo? I think I've heard of him before. He was famous around 3,000 years ago. What a pity, it seems like he died of a sudden plague. Sigh, mortals are too weak. They die hundreds of years after taking a nap. Indeed, they had the right to be arrogant. Far too many heroes who suddenly rose to power died at an even faster speed. But for these ancient existences, there was only one type of existence that they absolutely had to respect, and that was someone who had also passed the test of time and defeated the strongest among them. Omdoroken wasn't easy to deal with. This was the irrefutable evidence that countless people had sacrificed their lives in order to defeat him. The two elemental gods had also personally learned that the elemental gods were nearly undefeatable existences in their own elemental planes. They could borrow elemental power as they pleased, and they had bodies with unlimited health and mana. Perhaps it was possible to defeat them, but killing them was basically unrealistic. But the elemental storm that had swept through the entire elemental plane couldn't be faked. Not only had Omdoroken been defeated, he had even completely died. This completely exceeded their expectations, which left them at a loss as to what to do. Although their goal was to eliminate this huge piece of metal that was an eyesore, no matter how many preparations they made, a voice in their hearts kept telling them that killing him was impossible. It was enough as long as they didn't fail again. As long as we can seal him, no, as long as we can heavily injure him, it'll be enough for him to recover for a few more decades. From a certain standpoint, Omdoroken, who had been able to suppress the other three elemental gods for countless years, was indeed amazing. It was likely that the elemental gods' countless battles against him had left a shadow in their hearts. Obviously, this was also the reason why they didn't put in any effort. Even though they hated Omdoroken to the core, they were unwilling to go to the front lines and fight him to the death. Actually, their fear wasn't a mistake. Apart from the fact that they had accidentally weakened Omdoroken to his weakest state, the greatest contributor to their success in killing Omdoroken wasn't the divine Sin Shadow's frozen calamity aura. Rather, it was the independent world of frigid winter Earth. Of course, it was impossible to kill the Earth Elemental God in the Earth Elemental plane. However, Roland had been isolated in another world, unable to absorb even a sliver of the Earth element. He was in an even more pitiful state than he had been in the mortal plane. Plus, the Earth Elemental throne, which had been his pillar of support, had been destroyed, which was why it was possible for Roland to forever be trapped in frigid winter Earth. Roland definitely wasn't the only one who noticed that Omdoroken had faked his death. However, it was likely that Roland himself was the only one who had resolved to kill Omdoroken and spent so much effort in preparing such a fatal trap. How did Omdoroken die? How could he possibly die? Isn't he unkillable in this plane? But the truth was right in front of them, and they had no choice but to believe it. After a short period of joy at the death of their mortal enemy, the two elemental gods and the Earth Elemental lords felt the deepest fear in their hearts. He was even able to kill Omdoroken. If we were enemies, from a certain standpoint, this fear wasn't wrong. This was an alliance of benefits against a common enemy to begin with. Now that their common enemy had died, their alliance would naturally be dissolved. And the relationship between the two sides was rather subtle to begin with. Camderen and the others still had some camaraderie as comrades, while Alos had an unpleasant experience as an enemy in the Ottoman Empire. Previously, both sides had pretended to be ignorant of each other's relationship, but they hadn't turned on each other yet. But right now, the two elemental gods' reactions were obviously the opposite of what they expected. Camderen had a serious expression, and it was inevitable that anxiety would appear on his face. Meanwhile, Alos had a delighted expression after a short period of hesitation. Renée noticed all of this. Although she didn't show it on her face, she had an idea of what was going on. Camderen has an elemental army and winged people under his command. Perhaps he's even ambitious about the Northlands. Perhaps he's already made some arrangements. Meanwhile, Alos probably feels that we're strong enough, so he's more confident in reviving his husband. It would seem that Brother Roland was right. The Wind Elemental Lord is an ambitious person with luck. His ambitions are far greater than his power level. Although his plans will most likely fail, we still need to be more on guard. However, we still have hostages in our hands. Alos can fight for them. I had a sweet smile on my face, but I was secretly calculating in my heart. A certain princess had been with the two dark princes for far too long. It seemed that she was destined to become darker and darker. Suddenly, a slight earthquake interrupted their silence. A gigantic sandworm crawled out from the ground. Before it was attacked, it spat out a half-dragon covered in green mucus. The half-dragon's body was also covered in all sorts of things. That scene was too beautiful. In order to prevent my eyes from going blind and my appetite for dinner, I should just censor it and fast-forward it. Cough, cough. The moment that Beifong landed on the ground, he suddenly spat out something disgusting. Cough, cough, let's continue censoring it, and randomly censoring this moving filth's face as well. Beifong Heralt, it would seem that your new playstyle has improved yet again. Give us an inhumane reason to destroy you. Everyone surrounded Beifong with ill intentions, but Beifong raised his head proudly. What nonsense are you talking about? I'm the greatest contributor to all of this. Even Lord Roland is quite grateful to me. If it wasn't for the fact that I destroyed the elemental throne, who knows who would have won or lost." Hearing this, everyone's expressions eased up somewhat. The two Earth Elemental Lords also had expressions of realization, but, "What are you all doing?" Alright then, in a way, since the Earth Elemental Lords were so regretful about the destruction of the Elemental Throne that they were shouting that they were the ones who destroyed the Elemental Throne, that Brat Beifeng's taunting ability had probably reached the point of using his face to attract aggro. Fortunately, there weren't many Earth Elemental Lords present, so they didn't have the confidence to fight against the powerful Earth Elemental Lords. But at the same time, Camdron's face turned the color of a pig's liver. The Earth Elemental Lord's gaze towards Camdron was filled with hatred and anger, but he didn't dare to say anything. No matter how foolish he was, he knew that he had been tricked. However, the situation just so happened to be worse than the Earth Elemental Lords, so Camdron and the Earth Elemental Lords didn't dare to fight back. The Earth Elemental Lords' gazes towards Camdron were also quite unfriendly. Since they couldn't take care of the mastermind behind the scenes, nor did they dare to take revenge on the Wind Elemental Lord, then they would take care of the direct culprit in front of them to vent their anger. Wait a moment. Just as the Earth Elemental Lords were about to have a heart-to-heart talk with Beifeng, René suddenly spoke up and stopped them. "Your Highness René, you truly are a good person. I apologize for previously misunderstanding you. I promise that my subordinates will never spread rumors about you and Lord Roland ever again." Beifeng was probably having too much fun and drank too much neurotoxin. His mind wasn't clear enough, and he actually self-destructed in succession. It's actually fine to keep spreading rumors. No, I should say that it's better to keep spreading rumors. It'll be nice if everyone tacitly agrees. It's just a joke. Apart from Beifeng, please don't take it seriously. This time, it was a certain princess's turn to lose her moral integrity. However, Roland wasn't here, so there was obviously no one here to teach her a lesson or punish her. Clearing her throat, she asked the most important question at hand. I just wanted to ask why Brother Roland hasn't come out yet. Will he be alright? He said that he still has something to do and needs to cultivate in this dimension for a while. He wants us to ignore him and return first. René nodded as she glanced at the gradually collapsing temple. From another method of sensing, she knew that nothing would happen to Roland. There was a reason for him to leave now, so she directly retreated. "Everyone, please do as you please. In my dimension, beating up Beifeng is a daily routine. His skin is quite thick, so there's no need to worry about beating him to death." Alright then, Beifeng was instantly stunned as he hugged his head and squatted down. "Don't hit my face. I'm going to return to my lover's room later." Alright then, let's not ask him how he found a lover in the Earth Elemental Plane, nor shall we comment on what type of existence he would fall in love with. At the very least, this delightful scene of eating, sleeping, and beating up Beifeng was happening once again. Actually, while the Allied armies in the outside world were collapsing as expected, I indeed had some troublesome matters to deal with. It seemed that I wouldn't be able to return for the time being. Creating a more complete version of my frigid winter Earth would require an incredibly high-quality Earth elemental item. Originally, Omdoroken would have been an excellent choice, but now I had an even better choice. So this is the Earth Elemental Throne? The white crystal seemed simple and unadorned, but it was filled with mana waves, and he had already shattered into pieces. "You should call it a shard of the Earth Elemental Throne. Your Highness, your frostbite is too severe. Please don't move it as you please. This spell should be able to gradually heal your injuries. However, I still recommend that you continue fusing with the Earth Elemental Throne after you've recovered." Heloise had once again fallen into a deep sleep after using up too much of her power. The task that he had originally planned to carry out could only be handed over to a backup. The stealthy Eaglestorm was currently preparing the best healing spell. Originally, he hadn't been used as a last resort, but now he became the main physician and support that I needed the most. As a powerful Drool, controlling the power of nature and healing were essential tasks for him. With him here, I could relax slightly. However, I only smiled at Eaglestorm's advice and didn't respond. There were indeed some things that I couldn't say out loud. Was I supposed to say, "Ale just sent me a message that the barrier will last for another week. Hurry up and do what you need to do"? I watched as the shard of the Earth Elemental Throne's mana rapidly dissipate. I knew that the new Earth Elemental Throne was definitely absorbing its power, so I grit my teeth and put it into my world. In that case, let's give this frigid winter Earth a true land so that my world can take another step forward. Chapter 229. The endless, empty ocean was the cradle of all life forms. When lightning and storms intersected, the most primitive seeds of life were tossed into the ocean, and when these larvae finally evolved to a certain degree, they began to go ashore in search of a new home. Of course, this was only the most acceptable explanation for the origin of life in this world where science explained everything. As for whether or not this was actually the case, no one really knew. However, there were many similarities when discussing the creation legends of magical fantasy world. Every legend had its own similarities, but out of all the legends, the creation of humans from clay was probably the most common. In New Zealand's legends, the great god Tiki used his own blood and red clay to create humans. After the apocalypse, Noah tossed a stone behind him, and his son appeared. God used the dust of the ground to create the male Adam, and then used Adam's rib to create the first woman, Eve. However, the most famous legend was in Chinese legends. Nuwa grabbed mud and mixed water to create humans. In this world, it was unknown if Aichi had created life in such a manner. But since even the world was constructed with the four elements as the foundation, the various life forms here were nothing more than the condensation of the elements. Right now, in my world, a mythical scene of creation was also occurring. Ice mountains and ice plains began to melt. The thick layers of ice transformed into water, and the endless water transformed into creek. The creeks gathered into rivers, and rivers finally flowed towards the ocean. This world, which used the source of water as its foundation, was restored to its original appearance. As an ancient god equipment, Stonevilla transformed into the source of the ocean. The blue color that filled the sky was just like the endless flood from the legends. There were no storms, no waves, not even sound. Everything was silent. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to describe it as deathly silence. No matter which direction one looked at it from, the silhouette of the vast ocean was just the surface of the ocean that was far too lonely. When the white crystal fell into the ocean, the entire ocean began to boil. Countless bubbles spouted out of the water, and then yellowish-brown rock plates slowly rose from the water. The land that separated the ocean finally appeared. Everything was born, evolved, and died in the disorderly chaos. When the land was once again covered in ice and snow, the illusory space had already moved towards reality. The Earth Elemental Throne's crystal shards were just like the legendary living Earth, which would grow with the wind. They transformed into the foundation of calming sea and the core of the world, continuously constructing new continents. Time passed, and the cycle of time continued. The Second Ice Age descended once again. But this time, the endless ice plains no longer had layers of ice stacked on top of one another. There was real land beneath the distant icebergs and glaciers. When two of the four pillars of the world had been completed, the world had moved from a narrow space to reality. In the past, spatial rifts could still be seen at the edges of this place, but after the earth elementals that served as the base and foundation were in place, the space here finally stabilized. As for me, I was also frightened. I'm just creating a small world. What does this scene that looks like the beginning of the world mean? Could it be that I've unknowingly done something amazing? I could sense that this world was connected to me. Wherever my will reached, the glaciers could melt, the rivers could flow backwards, and the continents could break apart. However, I instinctively refused to allow any of this to happen. Don't interfere with them. Let them evolve on their own. A mysterious will suddenly spoke up in my mind. I felt as if there was a pair of eyes watching me from the shadows. I was rather confused and astonished, and then I was kicked out of my own world. I was actually kicked out of my own world. System notification. The Little Tyrant's server is currently under maintenance. Remember to check the system's announcement when it's under maintenance. Now, go wherever you need to go. Spend more time in the sun. Be careful of mushrooms growing on your head. Alright then, I knew that this fellow really was an immoral system. He was saying that I was an otaku who would die at the sight of sunlight. I was clearly a bright, sunny, and sporty young man. My neighbors all praised me for being a good man at home and a good employee outside of work, and for being a good neighbor. You really dare to say such things? The number of people who've been tricked by you is probably enough to form two groups. Just now, you fought with Amdaroken in such a manner, digging traps while scamming people. No matter how I look at it, you're the villain here. The black cat on my shoulder had woken up from its long sleep. But why was it commenting on me the moment it woke up? Could it be that Heloise, Sensei's only worth in life, was commenting? Server is currently under maintenance. Estimated opening time, 1.5 months later. System notification. Don't take the opening time seriously. I'm just saying it casually. Which company's server has ever been opened on time? As a player who was already numb to being tricked by others, I had to learn to be optimistic and accept delayed announcements one after another. What? You don't want to accept it? Fine then, you can try going to an online gaming company to PK in real life. As usual, I decisively ignored the system's nonsense. What attracted my attention was the system's stats, which were almost identical to the previous one. Completion rate? %. Fate points, 43201. The completion rate was actually a question mark. It seemed that even the system didn't know when it would finish. But judging from how my fate points weren't decreasing very quickly, I didn't need to be in a hurry to find quests to do. It seems that I should focus on letting the world evolve on its own. There's no need to forcefully interfere like last time. Where did so many fate points come from? Only now did I have the time to look at the system notification that I had long since forgotten about. Congratulations to host for killing Amdaroken by yourself. You have obtained Semigod equipment, Earth Roar Bracers, Amdaroken's Wall of Size, Myth-ranked Shield, and God-ranked material Earth Elemental Throne Fragment. Since this kill wasn't part of the system's quests, according to the system's rules, no fate points will be awarded. Congratulations to host for killing a true god by yourself. You have activated the Enemy of Gods series of achievements. You have obtained the honorary title God's Loathing. You have obtained 50,000 fate points. With this title, you will become a beginner-level Enemy of Gods. You will be able to deal 5% more damage to those with divine power. The next stage of this series of achievements is to kill 3 true gods by yourself. You will be awarded the honorary title God's Slayer. You will become a mid-level Enemy of Gods that can deal 15% more damage to those with divine power. When you kill 10 true gods, including one main god, by yourself, you will reach the peak of the Enemy of Gods achievement system. You will be awarded the honorary title Kratos isn't a god's fangs, he's a god's father. You will also receive the special effect of 50% more damage to God. However, after equipping this title, all gods will be less friendly towards you. You won't be able to hide this title either. You won't be able to continue killing gods, even if you don't want to. Alright then, let's ignore all these random comments. It would seem that I did quite well this time. The system was indeed very helpful and helpful. Not only did I obtain 2 top-level equipment, I even made up for Omdoroken's fate points in other ways. That Enemy of Gods title was one of the few titles that I could foresee being extremely useful. Speaking of usefulness, I suddenly recalled the Jinx and King of Gentlemen, achievements that I couldn't even deactivate. Recently, there had been more and more gentlemen, and the gentlemen were becoming more and more shameless. Perhaps this was all because of the system's scams. However, another troublesome issue had arrived in front of me. Warning: Stonevilla's Ocean Bottle's energy supply is unstable. Please complete the quest to hunt down the sea gods as soon as possible and collect the divine power of the sea beasts and sea god. This is the power needed to perfect this god equipment, as well as the path to creating your own world. It would seem that after the elemental god's body and the elemental throne's shard were embedded into my frigid winter earth, the originally fragile balance was broken yet again. Although this was a good thing for the world of frigid winter, hunting down the sea beasts and sea gods would likely be quite troublesome for me as well. However, what attracted my attention were the two pieces of equipment that were dropped directly. The real world wasn't like the game. Every boss wouldn't bring a large bag of equipment that they couldn't use. When they were defeated, they would simply toss out a few items according to the loot list. For quite a long time, no matter which enemy I defeated, I had never obtained any equipment from them. You want the enemy's equipment? You can just take it from the corpse. There's no such thing as a blacksmith in the real world. The system could only give me all sorts of random materials. All it did was help me save time in gathering them. However, I only needed to look at the two pieces of equipment to understand what was going on. Wrist Guards of the Earth. Semi-God Equipment. Effect 1. Power of the Earth. Absorbs the power of the Earth element and increases the wearer's strength stat by 10. However, the wearer must stand on the ground. This effect will disappear when the wearer jumps or flies. Effect 2. Stone of Undying. This wrist guard is indestructible. It can block attacks from god equipment. It can automatically repair itself after being damaged too much. Effect 3. Spatial Blink. Precise short-range teleportation, 3-minute cooldown. Range is limited to a radius of 100 meters. System Notification. Using this ability will consume a large amount of stamina. Please use it carefully. Curse of Divine Power. Petrify. Omdoroken curses any enemy that forcefully steals his power. The wearer of this wrist guard will receive 1 point of petrification damage per second. If the petrification exceeds 70% of the wearer's total HP, the wearer will be turned into a stone statue by the constant influx of earth element. A row of yellow words is carved on the wrist guard. This wrist guard contains the divine soul of an undying being. Just by touching it, one can feel his strength and unwillingness in the past. This grayish-black wrist guard didn't look very impressive. The scales on it were similar to Omdoroken's outer skin. There were 2 obsidian stones at the top of the wrist guard that looked like they were made of stone. However, when I touched it, I realized that it was actually a little warm. It also felt similar to skin, as though it was alive. As a semi-god equipment, it didn't have many abilities. However, its effects were surprisingly practical. Omdoroken's strongest abilities were all here. The massive increase in strength was a perfect match for melee combat. The Stone of Undying's ability could allow me to turn the tables at a crucial moment. Furthermore, Omdoroken had already displayed the power of Spatial Blink. That curse of divine power was indeed troublesome. It also limited his usage time and range. However, since I had the Titan body, I could completely ignore it. It seems that, just like that god equipment dagger from before, god-level existences can use their divine soul and divine power to create powerful equipment. Looking at these stats, it's as though they were tailor-made for me. I gleefully put on the wrist guard. I couldn't help but smile in delight when I felt my body's tremendous increase in strength. Strength would forever be the foundation of any melee combat job. I had never even heard of equipment that greatly increased my physical strength before. Who knows, I can finally compete with Amelia in strength. As for the other epic rank shield, it was a tower shield that could protect most of one's body. It looked like Immortal Orcan's face, and the eyes on it seemed to be glaring at him. It was a horrifying sight. I took a look at its stats. They were as practical as always. Super high defense, the most practical damage reduction, and an active attack ability. I would definitely be able to surprise my opponent. After considering it for a moment, I decided to use it myself. After all, when I fought against Omdorokan, every single one of his attacks had caused me to vomit blood and be injured. I felt that my defense was far too weak against an opponent of his level. It seems that I've truly reaped a great harvest this time. Could it be that the system has changed its mind and is planning on going down the path of a dragon? System notification: with great power comes great responsibility. The stronger you are, the fiercer your opponent will be. The system will never scam you. You're the one who dug your own pit and jumped into it. Can you blame me for always looking for trouble? Alright then, my expression instantly darkened. Wasn't it obvious that the system intended to continue scamming me? Couldn't you just let me be happy for a few days? Indeed, a great harvest. The black cat on my shoulder was smiling even more happily than I was. The next instant, I understood what she meant. I reached out with my paw, and with a distortion, the black cat disappeared without a trace. The next instant, a peerlessly beautiful golden-haired high elf appeared in front of me. Her silky blonde hair flowed in the wind, and her smiling face was as pure as snow. Her snow-white skin had a faint golden tint to it, and her innocent eyes were so pure that it made one's heart ache. This was a woman as pure as snow. She wore an ancient-style white dress with a silk handkerchief that dragged on the ground. Her extravagant salute was holy and beautiful, showing off Heloise's otherworldly aura. Right now, the person in front of me wasn't that banshee who had no morals or limits to speak of. Instead, she was the last princess of the ancient High Elf Empire. Golden elves are the most beautiful? Is this the purest form of temptation? As expected of the most beautiful of all elves. At that instant, even I was tempted. Even the most seductive succubus I had ever seen didn't have such a pure form of temptation that could make people fall for her. Just like how I was forcefully sent back to the time when I died in battle, the moment she regained her life, the magic of time caused her to return to the past. In that generation, the young female elves had the magical ability to use their charm to make everything fall for them. When I remembered that the one in front of me was the 1,000-year-old fairy Heloise, I calmed down. She smiled sweetly at me, her smile filled with sincerity. "Thank you, I'll remember this favor." Then, I was stunned and enraged. I pointed at the elven beauty and roared in anger. "Imposter! Who the hell are you?" That old witch Heloise would never thank anyone. It was even more impossible for her to smile so sweetly. Ah, goosebumps rose all over my body. What kind of monster are you? Hurry up and reveal your true form. Heloise's eyebrows trembled in anger, but she still did her best to suppress her anger. She took 2 deep breaths and forced out a smile. Hee, you really know how to joke. Who else could I be if not Heloise? Have you forgotten that I'm the last gold elf? This form is what I looked like before I died. However, the ancient gold elves were generally more than 2 meters tall, as if they had walked out of a painting with the golden ratio. They were fit and energetic, with beautiful curves that didn't lose their elegance. They actually had an unscientific chest size that was completely different from other gold elves, far surpassing those so-called supermodels. The most ridiculous part was that Heloise was probably the tallest among the gold elves, but she actually had to lower her head when she saw me, who was around 1.8 meters tall. Objection. If you didn't mention it, I would have forgotten. Weren't you still underage when you died? Who are you trying to fool? Magical pet order. Remove your disguise. I instantly understood. She was definitely putting on a brave front. She probably used her transformation ability to make herself look like this. The contract between magical pets didn't disappear with Heloise's revival. On the contrary, due to Heloise's fusion with Shadow, the single contract became two types of contracts, which became even stronger. If I forcefully gave the order, it would definitely be carried out. Roland, you bastard! This is my expected adult appearance, don't. The magical pet's order had already been given, and so a sudden flash of light represented that the hidden truth had been revealed. The next moment the light faded and the great beauty was gone. A golden-haired young gold elf appeared in front of me. Her long hair was all tangled up on the floor, and her overly loose dress directly slid down her shoulders. Her small and exquisite face was filled with anger, and her face was as red as an apple. Even her iconic gold elf ears were completely red. How interesting. Yep, it was very interesting to me. Good, the top is flat, the middle is flat, and the bottom is also flat. As expected, this is magic. This is the Heloise I know. I waved my hands in satisfaction as I nodded and walked over. Amidst Heloise's anger and embarrassment, I first lifted her up high, then did a windmill spin, and spun around and around. When Heloise collapsed on the ground in dizziness, I lowered my head and looked down at her from above. Finally, I rubbed her head. Yep, an 11-headed Heloise is too unscientific. A 3-headed Heloise is much more pleasing to the eye. Little friend Heloise, do you want to go look at goldfish with Uncle? Asterisk crack. Asterisk. Don't bite me. Hey, let go. It hurts, it hurts. Let go. Are you a dog? You bastard Lullicon. You bastard who deserves to be single for the rest of your life. A low voice escaped from her small mouth. She had actually transformed into a tiger's fang. All right then, let's put everything else aside for now. I should first think of a way to take off that glove on my hand. Chapter 230. Ever since I became slightly famous, most people would mention my name in prefixes, such as, damned Roland, bastard Roland, and why haven't you died yet, Roland? It seemed that the more familiar people were with me, the more they liked to call me by these prefixes. Perhaps it was because they had deep feelings for me that they used these prefixes. I could understand that they wanted to express their friendliness towards me by addressing me as Roland the Wise or Roland the Dearest to my face. That was why they used alternative terms like Roland the Wise and Roland the Dearest. Yep, they were just using this special method to express their deep friendship with me. They definitely didn't really have anything against me. For example, the one on my head. Although she was a bit moody, I was sure that she was just shy. That's enough. There's a limit to being shy. I know that you're very grateful to me, so don't be shy. It's bleeding again, stop biting me. Hey, did you hear me? Ka-cha. Ka-cha. Why did you transform your teeth into those sharp fangs? Did you intend to cosplay as a saber-toothed tiger? That's not how you should use your transformation ability. Alright then, let's ignore the bleeding head and the overly shy young elf on my head. At the very least, I still had many other important things to do. Bayphone wasn't lying when he told me that I wouldn't be able to leave this world for the time being, so I could only have them go back first. Even with the newly born Earth Elemental Pillar as a converter, the newly born world would still require a large amount of Earth Element as its foundation. And in terms of Earth Element quantity and quality, no other world would be able to compare to the Earth Elemental Plane. My system's hint was quite clear. It told me to stay in this plane for the time being and not go anywhere. After Omdaroken died, the connection between the two planes was re-established. A certain shameless elemental god directly blamed Omdaroken for the interruption of the Earth Elemental Plane, since nobody dared to ask him about it. In the end, it was likely that nothing would happen. After the Earth Elemental Plane's connection was re-established, I spent a lot of time just dealing with inquiries from the mortal plane. However, the information I received made me heave a sigh of relief. The situation in the Northlands was quite good. Amelia's new crops had already been verified by Drool to be effective. They would all be sown at the beginning of next month's spring. My Knight Army's reorganization was also progressing smoothly, and the Mist Alliance's contract negotiations had also begun. Everything seemed to be developing in a good direction. Of course, even if it was a good place, there was also a lot of noise. I might as well tell the truth. I didn't spend much time on proper business. Most of my time was spent on defending against the rumors that spread faster than dimensional communication. The rumors about Prince Roland and a legendary which had already reached the 3rd edition. Judging from the sounds of people scratching and tearing at the wall, a certain Marchioness seemed to be quite angry. That was why she needed to calm down before she could do so. I'd better stay away for the time being. Cough cough, I'd better cultivate outside for a while. Since the Northlands were temporarily not at war, most of the other information didn't have much to do with me. However, there was still some information that I really cared about. The Ottoman Empire's plan to retake their capital city has been thwarted. Rain City's surface area is continuously expanding, and a large number of sea tribe members have begun constructing defensive fortresses. Ancient sea monsters have even appeared to assist them. The waves and the sea level are rising day by day. The human side situation isn't optimistic. Although these were all frontline battles caused by the elemental gods' troops, the results seemed quite different. However, the outcome seems to be very different. From the news I received, the Åland Empire doesn't seem to be in a good state. Lady Storm actually managed to advance in rank as well? A powerful god? Perhaps the sea tribe's faith in this guardian goddess was even more pious, or perhaps it was the Chaos faction's reward for those who contributed, but this Lady Storm, who was notoriously temperamental, had become even stronger in battle. It seems. That's the true key to victory. If Rose hadn't been killed off by Cavendish back then, we probably wouldn't have been in such a good situation either. Actually, if I compared both battles, the situation was quite similar. Both battles were being fought on behalf of the Chaos faction's true gods. However, unlike Rose, who had died prematurely, Lady Storm had probably become a new noble of the Chaos faction. From a certain standpoint, she was getting closer and closer to the position of sea god that she had always dreamed of. Oh my, that's quite troublesome. It just so happens that my world also needs divine power and divine souls related to the sea. It seems that we'll have more opportunities to interact with each other in the future. Back then, we still had quite a bit of grudge against each other. In fact, my system even warned me not to get too close to the sea. Actually, Lady Storm had always been famous for being petty. Just because the Borealis was being repaired and docked at the seaside, those annoying sea monsters immediately followed Lady Storm's instructions and attacked us. Although we won that battle, our grudge was also formed. At the time, I didn't have the time to bicker with her. But now, it seemed that I could. At the very least, the quest to collect the divine power and divine souls of the sea gods and sea monsters would most likely involve Lady Storm, who had the nickname of Sea Monster King. It's a pity that the Ottoman Empire is more concerned about its reputation than anything else. Not only did it refuse to ask for help from the various gods' churches, it even tactfully refused the other human kingdoms' offers of help. As a rational person, I was unable to understand why the Ottoman Empire would place such a high priority on face and dignity. But since the Ottoman Empire insisted on dealing with this matter by itself, the other countries and gods' churches had no reason to interfere. What's face? Can it be eaten? By Roland. I shook my head and tossed this boring topic to the back of my mind. The only other thing that slightly attracted my attention was something similar to hearsay. Congratulations, Roland. Since you defeated Omderoken, your calamity rankings have increased by 6 rank. You're now ranked 27. You actually entered the top 30 so quickly. I couldn't understand why Amelia had such an envious expression when she said this. Could it be that she felt that her ranking wasn't high enough? Was it really that good to be a humanoid calamity rankings? She would scare Lolis just by going out, but that would be a serious crime. I seemed to have said something wrong. Naughty children were the most annoying. Heloise, how many times have I told you? I'm really not a lolicon. If you keep using my tone and ruining my reputation, I'll. That's right. The ornament, on top of Amelia's head, was the one who said such a standard Sundra declaration. However, she didn't even look at me when I threatened her. It was obvious that she had a disdainful expression of, "What can you possibly do to me?" But don't say anything. Right now we were both suffering, so there was really no need for me to use any vicious tactics on her. I'll have you wear a student's swimsuit with cat ears and a cat tail to go to school at Caro Plaza. Even Heloise was frightened upon hearing this. It would seem that even she didn't expect that I would be so shameless as to actually think of such a method to threaten her. You really do have wild desires towards me. You're actually able to think of such a perverted way to play with me, and you still refuse to admit that you're a lolicon. Alright then, it would seem that I was making things worse. She was actually so frightened that she directly transformed into a black cat. Seeing such a rare scene, I got quite playful. I really wanted to tease her again. Humph, do you think that I can't do anything to you just because you've transformed into a black cat? Have you forgotten that Beifong is also in this dimension? Alright then, this name seemed to contain an infinite amount of magic. Heloise instantly transformed back into a young girl and kept shaking her head. Don't turn me into a cat. Lock me up together with that super pervert. As long as you don't do that, I'll listen to everything you say. That day. Whoa. It would seem that Heloise had a deep impression of what happened when she first left the underground. Now, she was actually frightened by a name to the point of self-destructing. While I had a handle on how to make her admit defeat, I couldn't help but sigh. To be able to frighten Heloise to such an extent, from a certain standpoint, the name Beifong. Herald already had a deterrence that far surpassed his own strength. And looking at the current Heloise, I couldn't help but sigh. The mind would affect the physical body, and the physical body would similarly affect the mind. After Heloise regained her life, she was affected by her younger physical body. Recently, she had become much more emotional, and would often do some foolish things. This was a good thing for her. Although she had been acting foolishly quite a few times recently, at the very least, she had become more human. But right now, I could only hope that her magic skills wouldn't decline along with her physical body. Alright, then help me. I'm afraid that only you can deal with this matter. I indeed needed Heloise's help, and I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. I also needed to make her do her best. Making her obediently help me had caused me to lose quite a few brain cells. Currently, the area around the elemental throne, which was one of the main battlefields, had been cleared out. It had now become a forbidden area patrolled by the public security team. The reason for this was the 7 Calabash brothers, who were sleeping soundly in the center of the forbidden area. They were sprawled out on the ground, and their snores were as loud as thunder. As they were true calamities, nobody wanted to see them suddenly wake up. Obviously, having them sleep forever would be the safest method. However, I had promised Renee that I would help her think of a way to see if I could borrow the power of these evil children of the earth. That's impossible. Let's not even talk about whether or not it's possible to summon them to the mortal plane, nor do we need to consider the tremendous price required to summon existences of this level. As long as they appear in the mortal plane, you'll instantly be in big trouble. Heloise instantly rejected my insane idea of borrowing the power of the divine sins of the earth. However, I was unmoved. I knew what she meant from the very start, but I had other plans. A complete summoning is definitely impossible, but what about a partial summoning? A partial summoning? What's that? I've never heard of such a thing before. What kind of nonsense are you spouting? For Heloise, who had the reputation of being the omniscient, to admit that she didn't know anything, this concept of partial summoning was probably an unheard-of topic even in the entirety of Aichi. A summoning is a connection between two individuals. Either the summoning fails or the entire body passes over. What does partial summoning mean? Only half of the body passes over? Every time new magical knowledge was involved, Heloise would easily get excited. This time was no different. She seemed to have forgotten her earlier displeasure as she excitedly asked me about it. I directly nodded in response to Heloise's doubts. Yes, it's a partial summoning. I ignored Heloise's astonished expression as I started explaining my goal. As I explained, Heloise's expression changed from astonishment and disbelief to helplessness. What an interesting plan. You're the best at such unorthodox method. I've never seen you so serious when learning magic. Is it impossible? Although I don't want to admit it, the success rate is indeed quite high. Let's give it a try. I'm impressed that you're able to come up with so many strange ideas. I nodded in satisfaction. Since Heloise said so, then the success rate was quite satisfactory. Actually, my plan was quite simple. It didn't even require any high-level knowledge. All I needed was the most basic dimensional knowledge. First, I'll open up a small dimensional link that only allows its arms and other limbs to pass through. Then, I'll have Renee awaken a divine sin right in front of me. The awakened divine sin will instinctively attack everything in front of it, and the narrow dimensional link won't allow it to pass through. The only dimensional link will definitely become a channel for the divine sin to vent its power. In that case, the enemies on the other side of the dimensional link will naturally be attacked. Then, Renee will give the command to sleep, which will end the summoning. The theory was quite simple, and it was quite a trick. However, it was fine as long as it was practical. Even I wasn't confident that I would be able to survive a single slap from a divine sin. I've already come up with a name. Behold my golden finger. Golden finger? What golden thigh? What does that mean? It doesn't fit the situation at all. Then what about Buddha's palm and 9 divine hooves? That means that your naming talent has completely failed. It's even worse than a golden finger. Chapter 231. The great stone sculptor is the first to fight? Oh my, I didn't expect him to be so impatient. I wasn't surprised at all when I heard that the Earth Elemental Lords were fighting each other. After all, rather than waiting for the Earth Elemental throne to be re-established before fighting to the death, it would be better to take advantage of the fact that I now had the upper hand to eliminate the Earth Elemental Lords and solidify my advantage. War never required the approval of both sides. It could be said that neither side wanted a war. As long as one side believed that they had an obvious advantage and could obtain tremendous benefits from the war, then it would only be a matter of time before war broke out. Right now, the Earth Elemental Plane was just like a coliseum that had lost its manager. All the wild beasts had been placed in a cage, and when they learned that there would only be one Earth Elemental throne, the strongest wild beasts unhesitatingly began to eliminate those that could threaten them, while the weaker wild beasts began to group together for warmth. And so, a chain war began. Driven by the temptation of ascending to godhood, it was likely that this war would continue for another 100 years or so in the foreseeable future. While the Earth Elemental Plane was in chaos, the seemingly peaceful mortal plane was in even greater trouble. Rose's death and Lady Storm's ascension to godhood had caused the Order of the Gods, which had been stable for 1,000 years, to become restless. This was more than enough to cause the gods hiding in the shadows to become restless. And these weren't the only two gods that had been replaced. Amdaroken's death shocked the entire world. It was also confirmed from another source that the fire elemental god had mysteriously died as well, becoming a fire sea marchioness. Of the 4 ancient elemental gods, only 2 remained, and they were the weaker 2. This caused the undying to tremble in fear, but also caused the ambitious ones who were uneasy about the current situation to become restless. And this wasn't even the recent Best Newcomer title. This honor had obviously been taken by Womians. He had gone from an unknown city judge to the god of law, and then from a low god to a medium god. Now, he had even obtained the divine concept of the Northland's guardian god, and was the national religion of several Northland's countries. This was something that other true gods might not be able to accomplish in thousands of years, but he had accomplished it in just 2 short years. It was impossible to describe him as an epic legend. A single successful pioneer would definitely bring about countless imitators, undying individuals who attempted to ascend to godhood, as well as the ancient gods who were gradually being forgotten in history, would have to take action if they didn't want to miss out on this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They took in some barbarian tribes, awakened their own clans from their slumber, or simply changed their clothes and mounted their horses themselves. In the past month, the news of the third kind of contact had surpassed the news of the past 10 years. The various kinds of border conflicts had reached the sum of the past 30 years. Flame ogres have appeared in the AMU mountains. They seem to be the descendants of the ancient ogres. They have attacked the AMU mountain hunters and seem to treat the AMU territory as their territory as. It's said that they have the characteristics of both living and elemental creatures. They're quite powerful. A strange creature has appeared along the Casolan coastline. It looks like an octopus that walks upright. They're using extremely strange engineering tools and soul magic. They've enslaved the local humans as laborers and have begun constructing their own arc-shaped sky tower. The Kingdom of the Elves in the Southwest Mountains has announced that they're establishing a united kingdom. They've already begun expelling the humans within and around their borders. The elven gods are still remaining silent, but without their permission, such a thing would never happen. The human kingdoms in the east have already cut off all trade with the other countries. They're actually expelling the envoys of the other countries. I've expected this day ever since they started believing in that strange voodoo religion over 100 years ago. Sooner or later, they'll become something that's neither human nor ghost. A new type of subhuman has appeared in the Amon Plains. They look like young humans, but they're not even half as tall as humans. They have beastly ears and are extremely adept at taming wild beasts. That's not important. The most important thing is that they're all incredibly cute. They're basically a paradise for lollicons. Quite a few members of the Gentleman Alliance were willing to volunteer themselves to investigate, but in order to avoid causing conflicts between species, not a single one of them was approved. A storm is brewing. Even the stupidest person would sigh when they saw the series of war warnings. After the outpost battle, which was regarded as a precursor to war, was over, it would naturally be an eventful period before a storm. But the only thing worth celebrating was that the Northlands, which had just experienced the flames of war, was now abnormally calm. In fact, there was even an abnormal vacuum. It would seem that killing the chicken to warn the monkey was useful. At the very least, there aren't any foolish idiots coming to the Northlands for the time being. Perhaps in the eyes of most undying existences, the Northlands had already become Womian's territory. At the very least, nobody wanted to challenge this powerful upstart for the time being. And this relatively peaceful period was exactly what I was hoping for. Truly unifying the Northlands would require a large amount of time, even if it was only a relatively loose alliance. But simply being passive wasn't an option either. This was just like playing chess. No matter how well one handled one corner of the chessboard, if one lost the overall situation, there would be nothing they could do. Using my country's name or my personal name to interfere will cause a lot of trouble. If Womians interferes, it's even more likely that the gods will gang up on me. A neutral identity is the best. Perhaps that absolute gentleman alliance mercenary group will come in handy. It would seem that I'll need to have a good chat with Beifong. After thinking about it for a moment, I realized that this mercenary group that I created on a whim was probably the most suitable identity for me to travel around the entire continent. Although the Gentleman Alliance had an excellent relationship with Donglan, Beifong and the others had worked hard to establish the mercenary group as an independent organization from the very start. It could be said that the mercenary group was an official organization, but it didn't have an official background. Such a mercenary group would have the possibility of operating across borders, and it would be the most suitable identity for me to act in. If you didn't mention it, I would have forgotten that I'm still the nominal leader of that mercenary group. Yep, it would seem that there are many tricks I can play with. Actually, only after I returned to the mortal plane did I learn that that mercenary group that seemed like a joke had long since become the #1 mercenary group in the entire continent. Those bastards used my name to buy horses and soldiers, and all the government officials had to give me face. Perhaps in the eyes of outsiders, this mercenary group had become my, Roland's, private army. Of course, this was doubtlessly something that any ruler would be afraid of. There were plenty of examples of mercenary kings becoming kings and emperors in history. However, Donglan's special internal relationships, especially my miraculous relationship with Rene, made most people happy to see this mercenary group expand. In fact, they even viewed this mercenary group as a supplement to the government's military. There would always be a limit to the government's military. In this generation where the strong were king, it was always necessary to have the strength to protect oneself. Mercenary groups had always been popular, but the result of the lack of restrictions was that some mercenary groups would normally be mercenaries, but when they didn't have any work to do, they would become bandit. If a mercenary group needed to transport some precious goods, they would have to be careful that they would become bandits midway. If a certain place's reputation was bad, they could simply switch to another location. In this world of endless fighting, those with strength would never be unable to make a living. But compared to other mercenary groups that were on the run, the Gentleman Alliance's reputation among the commoners was excellent. Although their fees are rather high, they're quite strong and have a good reputation. Although their members are a little strange, they're all good people. Even though there are some complaints about their strange temperaments and personal style, there are currently 0 complaints about their professional ethic. The people who entrust mercenary missions to them have generally given them high evaluations. This was the Mercenary Guild's evaluation, which added even more credibility to the Gentleman Alliance. Yeah, that uncle voluntarily helped me find a kitten, and he didn't even take my pocket money. He wanted me to hug a doll and smile at them as commission. They always had lollipops in their pockets. How nice. This was a subtle comment from a certain lowly, and the expressions of the people who heard this were even more subtle. Most of the rookies at the bottom level are local soldiers and retired veterans. Many of the middle and high-level members are well-known powerful individuals in the continent, and they're even heroes of this war against the Beastmen. Most importantly, the leader of this mercenary group is actually His Highness Roland. Even if such a mercenary group is a little expensive, it's still reassuring. But there's also a rumor that the members who join the mercenary group will become stranger and stranger. It must be a rumor created by those jealous people. With their reputation, strength, official guarantee, and local acquaintances, in addition to the countless number of mission orders, and most importantly, their outstanding achievements in the war against the Beastmen, it would be strange if such a mercenary group didn't become a big deal. And so, with the #1 person in the mercenary group, me, not doing anything, and the #2 person in the mercenary group, Beifong, running amok, Beifong went off to do his own things. This strange mercenary group actually operated on its own and became bigger and bigger. Now, it's the #1 mercenary group in the Northlands, deeply trusted by the people, and unknowingly, it became a faction that no one could ignore. And in the distant Northlands, what Roland wanted to do was already on the way. From a certain standpoint, it was no wonder that Eliza was the successor that he had prepared for himself. After gathering all this information, she unhesitatingly sent out a large number of spies. In fact, at her request, the Gentlemen's Alliance mercenary group began to establish branches in other countries, and the Church of Law's judges also began their journey. It's definitely not advisable to keep our doors closed and wait for news. Right now, we need a large amount of information. The more, the better, especially regarding the undead and the Bardi Empire. Actually, there were some things that she didn't have time to report to Roland yet. Among all the messy information, there was one piece of information that attracted Eliza's attention. The Bardi Empire discovered a gigantic skeletal door made of bones. According to the records, it seems to be a dimensional door to the undead plane. And it's said that this dimensional door has already existed for a year and a half. This information was only hearsay, but Eliza treated it with great importance. While the other countries were still treating the undead calamity as a joke, she had already sent out her own spies. Combined with the recent abnormal movements in the Bardi Empire, if this information is confirmed to be true, and if that dimensional door really does exist, or if it's been coexisting peacefully with the Bardi Empire for more than a year, then there are some things that I really need to reconsider. But before she could finish giving out orders, a new order interrupted all her plans. Celebration? At this time? Did Roland get sick again? That's right, this was a letter that had come from another plane. It explained in detail that on the last Sunday of winter, there would be a celebration called the Day of Peace Celebration. The letter even mentioned some of the planned activities, such as organizing a traveling circus, military parades, hunting at the end of winter, and inviting various countries' ambassadors to organize a cocktail party. And it just so happens that there's less than a month left. How are we supposed to make it in time? We haven't even solved our long-term food problem, and we still need to arrange such an extravagant celebration? We'll consume at least 3 times more food during the celebration period than usual. Just the Mist Alliance's diplomatic and business negotiations had already caused the administrative officials in Donglan to be overloaded. At this time, there was only less than a month left to prepare, yet they wanted to hold a nationwide celebration? That was impossible no matter how they thought about it. It was said that after seeing this order letter, a dozen administrative officials were frightened to the ground, and the emergency room was filled to the brim. His Highness Roland really wants to kill us. Even if we risk our lives, it'll be too late. This had already become a private complaint, but some people suppressed all the complaints and worked overtime to come up with the task list, forcing the publicity to be done. Sister Kelly, there's no need to go along with that guy's nonsense. There's no way we can make it in time. That's right, as the head female official of the royal palace, Kelly was actually the #1 civil official in the Donglan royal palace. She was the only one who could forcefully carry out the celebration based on her long-standing reputation. But when she saw so many staff members frowning in distress, even Eliza couldn't stand it anymore. And so, she decided to discuss it with Kelly. Kelly suddenly chuckled when she heard this. You still don't understand Roland. It's fine if others are messing around because of him, but you're actually thinking the same? That'll make him really sad. Eliza was rather confused. Was there something strange about this sudden celebration? Look, this might seem like messing around, but it's actually the most important thing right now. Organizing the winter hunting competition was our original goal. If spring arrived, the starving beasts would automatically disperse, which would be quite troublesome to deal with. But now that the war is over, it's quite obvious that the soldiers and commoners are tired of war. Openly using the army might not be a good thing. If we organize a competition like the winter hunting competition, it'll be quite easy to motivate everyone. Then what about inviting important officials from various countries to attend a banquet and organizing a military parade? The problem of food reserves hasn't even been fundamentally solved yet. Isn't it a bit too much to be extravagant and wasteful now? Kelly shook her head. Smoke swirled around her as she lightly stroked her hair. She seemed to be secretly laughing, as if she was sighing. Her eyes were filled with an indescribable mature charm. When I first saw it, I was a little puzzled as well. But after thinking about it carefully, this is actually a great way to solve short-term diplomatic and trade problems. It seems that even if he didn't participate in it personally, little Roland has always been thinking about this problem. Ah? What? How is that possible? Rather than calling it a question, it would be more accurate to call it an expression of accumulated resentment. It seemed that Eliza had accumulated enough resentment. Look, inviting important officials from various countries to organize a celebration banquet is undoubtedly a great opportunity to solve our diplomatic problems. And the military parade is the most appropriate occasion to let them see our new army types and new war machines. You mean? Arms trade? This time, Eliza really fell into deep thought. Although it was called voluntary military assistance, it was actually an arms trade with a clearly marked price. It was a task that had been planned long ago, and it was also a trump card to solve the future food shortage before the new crops had a stable supply. According to the original plan, they would send out middlemen to promote the goods after next spring. But after thinking about it for a while, there were constant disturbances, and all countries were actively preparing for war. If Donlon organized a military parade and arms exhibition, there would definitely be a lot of high-ranking officials and nobles. At that time, it would be a seller's market, and it would be profitable to quote any price they wanted. Thinking about this, Eliza came to a sudden realization. She looked at Kelly with a complicated gaze. From a certain perspective, this sister Kelly actually knew Roland better than her, his girlfriend. This made her a little jealous. That circus and float parade are just nonsense, right? However, Kelly shook her head. In her mind, that was the highlight of this celebration. Actually, when I saw this, I also thought it was nonsense. But thinking about it carefully, it was our negligence. There are some things that Roland saw, but we didn't. As she spoke, Kelly walked to the window and opened it. Outside, there was a prosperous scene. The old city area was being renovated, the new city area was being built, next year's planting plan, and the military reorganization plan. The people coming and going were all busy for their own reasons. Although most of them looked tired, they were in good spirit. Too many things have happened in this period of time. Although everyone is working hard for the future, the tense strings will eventually snap. There are still so many things to do next year, and it will be even busier. If there is an end to the year celebration, everyone can celebrate and relax for a few days. It can also be considered as a spiritual end to this turbulent year. Eliza thought for a moment and nodded. I'm afraid that Roland has another intention. Actually, the Red Hunting Hounds also worked as a circus in Sulphur Mountain City. Roland asked to see the circus performance, so he probably wants to use it to close the gap between the living and the dead. Kelly couldn't help but laugh. I didn't think of that. As expected of little Roland's girlfriend. All right, this sudden and direct attack caused Eliza's cheeks to flush red. She seemed to be at a loss for what to do, but very quickly, she adjusted her glasses and calmed down. However, what she was looking at was the seemingly frivolous but deep letter. Let's begin. We don't have much time. We need to organize the grandest celebration before Roland returns. Okay. Several days later, when a thick celebration plan was sent to me through the gnome's expensive teleportation device, I felt rather complicated. We'll prepare everything. Don't worry. I didn't expect you to think so thoroughly. Looking at this note, Heloise read it out in a small voice. Then, she said in astonishment. Oh my, I didn't expect so many people to have such a goal. You're really amazing. They were actually able to see through it. You found quite a few good helpers. After hesitating for a moment, I finally decided to say it directly. Actually, I didn't expect it either. I just wanted to organize a grand party. Then why did you want to organize a celebration? Why did you have to do it on that day? I just wanted to celebrate my victory. I didn't even think about that much. Just for that? Heloise had an expression of disbelief. She could sense from our sole contract that I was probably hiding something from her. It was quite boring to be stared at by this damned young girl, so I could only helplessly nod. That day was my birthday. Why are you all looking at me like that? I work so hard to do so much, so can't I just have a grand birthday party? My requirements aren't that high. I just want to watch a circus, go hunting, and host 2 banquets. That's not too much at all. Glancing at the 300-400-page proposal, which was definitely one that had been painstakingly written, Heloise wiped away her cold sweat and felt even more sympathy for the normal people under Roland's command. This proposal covered every aspect, and it was thorough and detailed. It would have been impossible to create without 40 to 50 employees working overtime for half a month. Yet, it had only been 3 or 4 days, and the results were already out. It could only be said that the author had put in a lot of effort and put his life on the line. This time, no matter what, don't tell the truth. Just do as the proposal says. Otherwise, even I want to beat you up. At this moment, apart from nodding, what else could I say? Chapter 232. When mentioning mages, most people would think of towering mage towers, clean and tidy libraries, wondrous automatic magic tools, elegant mage robes, long beards, and presbyopic glasses that represented wisdom. But actually, I had never seen any mages who could do all of these things. No, I had only seen very few mages who could keep their rooms clean and tidy. Actually, most mage laboratories that I had seen before were in complete chaos. Books and scrolls were piled up into mountains, and unwashed laboratory equipment had a nauseating odor. It would be perfectly normal to see magical creatures and ooze monsters everywhere if they hadn't been cleaned up for too long. Aren't there self-moving brooms and puppets that automatically clean the bookshelves? If those things are charged, daily maintenance will require a large amount of mana, and they'll be quite expensive. If they're single-use, plus the cost of materials, it'll be even more expensive. Those things are only used by the mage country to keep up appearances in public. Who knows who uses them in private? But since you're a wise mage, it shouldn't be difficult for you to clean your own room. You can always hire someone to do it for you. There are many things that are dangerous for laymen to touch, but it's not safe for professionals to do it. Clean it yourself? I really want to take out 26 hours out of every 24 hours to do research. I don't have the time at all. That's why I'll leave everything to you. Right? Remember to water the garden in the south once a day. You don't have to water it yourself. You just have to open the valve when you enter the core area. Oh right. If you have time, help me find a gardener. He hasn't come out since 3 days ago. I wonder if he took his wages and ran away. As expected, they don't pay him in advance. How many times has he done this? From a certain standpoint, the mage academies back in the day were quite similar to the current academic institutions. Students studied under teachers, which counted as working for them. Since it was inconvenient for teachers to hire outsiders to do odd jobs for them, it was quite normal for students to work as servants. Back in the day, I had done research under Senior Emily as an apprentice, so I didn't really mind doing odd jobs. However, my very first mission completely changed my impression of mages. Mage robes? That's inconvenient to move about, so I don't need it at home. Convenient to use magic materials? Heh, at my level, there's no need for that. Back in the day, my friendly upperclassman had only subverted my common sense at first, but she was surprisingly friendly. However, the task of cleaning up the research lab almost cost me my life. Don't even think about the bonus storyline of a beautiful teacher exposing her naked body to the world or having her own personal portrait drawn. I would have to accumulate 2 rooms worth of personal portraits, and the quest that gave me the greatest surprise was actually to water the plants in the garden. That daily quest allowed me to completely abandon the beautiful illusion of Amelia and finally see her true colors. At this point, perhaps everyone understood. Back then, Amelia hadn't yet viciously planted the 7 virtues in her own backyard, but I had first enjoyed the predation of man-eating flowers, the entanglement of the Black Forest magic vines, and then played an exciting wilderness survival game and Resident Evil. If it wasn't for the fact that I had some skills back then, I probably would have died mysteriously like the previous gardener. Most of the lessons that followed were similar experiences. I finally understood why this senior sister with a good reputation always needed new acolytes. I roared from the bottom of my heart as I swung my sword to kill that familiar mutated man-eating flower. Following that fellow to become an acolyte, without the strength of a sword saint, it's impossible to survive. Why are you suddenly roaring? Are you deaf? All right then, I accidentally roared out all the resentment in my heart. I really couldn't be blamed for everything that happened back then. Perhaps Amelia really didn't have any ill intentions back then, but even I, who had the power of a sword saint, was on the brink of death multiple times. Who else could I blame but her? Now that I thought about it, tricking her back then was actually a good deed. At the very least, there would be fewer victims in the future, such as those missing gardeners and acolytes. Oh my, that's so ridiculous. The reason why I brought up the past was because the scene before me seemed so familiar. This was a forest overgrown with weeds. Man-eating flowers and other such things were as common as weed. The poisonous fragrance of flowers permeated the air, and 30-meter-tall mushrooms were actually swallowing each other. The most ridiculous thing of all was a pumpkin carriage that was being dragged around by a giant rat. At any rate, this was an absolutely dangerous area where all sorts of dangerous plants could roam freely. After returning to Caro, I heard that Amelia actually hadn't left yet, so I had some guesses. Also, where else would be more suitable for doing as she pleases? Without the country's supervisory council and law-breaking investigators, she can probably try all sorts of forbidden experiments. Should I say that I didn't let her down? I actually saw such a scene when I arrived at her temporary residence. Obviously, either she wasn't intending to write an experimental report with several 100,000 words, or she had gone overboard yet again. I suggest that we go around in circles. Since Amelia hasn't come out yet, she's probably trapped. Any one of her virtues, going out of control will be an unbearable pain. I unhesitatingly turned around and left. What? Worried about Amelia? Calamities could live for thousands of years. Using this as a standard, it would be quite easy for Amelia to live for 10,000 years. For her, no matter how much she played, she would only go overboard for a moment. She would be fine as long as she figured it out herself. Didn't you say that you were going to invite her to your birthday party? No matter what, she's been working so hard to help you recently. That's so rude of you. The silly cat. Perhaps I should call her a silly loli now. She grabbed onto my clothes and refused to let me leave. Judging from her expression, she seemed rather dissatisfied. I had a headache now. Ever since I revived, Heloise had become far too emotional. It seemed that she was cuter when she was in her silly cat form. At the very least, most of the time, she wouldn't be interested in anything that had nothing to do with her. She wasn't like her current self, where she was basically a curious baby. Her emotions would change incredibly quickly, and her fangs were becoming more and more convenient. Would I bite you if you didn't make me angry? Stop making wild guesses. You didn't say it out loud, but your expression is so obvious. Who wouldn't understand? Right? Why did you suddenly want to hold a birthday party and invite guests everywhere? No matter how I look at it, you don't seem like someone who values anniversaries like birthdays at all. In your eyes, I'm probably supposed to have a serious expression all the time, plotting behind the scenes and preparing some backup plan? Then, no matter what I do, I'll have to come up with a series of schemes? Alright then, this fake loli actually dared to vigorously nod at me. Just wait for my revenge. Starting from next week, you'll have no breakfast, lunch, or dinner. You'll either have to go out into the wilderness with me to complete your cooking god achievement, or you'll have to eat Amelia's experimental subjects. It seemed that, if you chose the latter, you'd still be able to complete your cooking god achievement. Rosa's dead. She's the first major character on this list to be crossed off. You should be happy now. Heloise nodded lightly. On the list that she gave me to hate, this former top 3 elf true god was the target that she was determined to take revenge on. No matter what, you're alive again. If you're trying to convince me to give up on revenge, don't even think about it. Even if I'm alive again, the grudges of the past will never be resolved. Don't get so worked up. I'm not foolish enough to try and convince you to give up on revenge. I'm just looking forward. Living a better life for yourself has no conflict with revenge. Some words had been on my mind for a long time. I was quite hesitant, but I finally said them out loud. Actually, I'm the same. I'm constantly haunted by the past. No, I should say that we're the ones who can't let it go. All these years, the scene of the capital's destruction has been haunting me in my nightmares. It's really unpleasant. I paused for a moment. I had held it in for so long that I didn't even know how to express myself. I won't tell you to let go of the past, nor will I tell you any nonsense like hatred is meaningless. That's because to us, whose goal in life is revenge, that's just an insult. But just like how Rosa's death made you feel much more at ease, the Mist Kingdom's revival in a different way is also a form of release for me. I was starting to feel a little embarrassed after saying all this, but it seemed that stopping would only make things worse, so I could only brace myself and continue. If it's impossible to forget the past, then let's focus more on the future. In any case, we're no longer lone avengers, and we can barely be considered a family. If there's any trouble, just leave it to others to help. At the very least, I've made up my mind that even if I fail in the end, I'll make full use of my time in the future and enjoy what I missed out on previously. All right, when I said all this, I felt my face turning red. That's why it's normal to find a few friends to hold a small birthday party. How could I have known that they would make it so big? Don't Eliza and the others know that it's your birthday? Kelly probably forgot about it. It's something that happened several centuries ago, so who would remember it clearly? As for Eliza, in Sulphur Mountain City, we don't celebrate our birthdays. We have our own anniversary, and it was invented by me. Then what do you celebrate? We're all undead, so the day we die is a new beginning. We all celebrate our death anniversary, and I just happen to have a few death anniversaries, so I'm too lazy to celebrate them. It's normal that they don't know about it. Hearing this, Heloise was speechless. How dare they say that they don't know how to enjoy life? Back in Shiluo, she had never heard of any undead celebrating their death anniversary to commemorate the day they died. These undead of Sulphur Mountain City really knew how to have fun. Wait a moment, all the high-level undead in your army died on the same day, so wouldn't they all celebrate their death anniversaries together? Yep, that's why we call that day Annihilation Day. We'll continue to have a grand celebration, parade the entire city, and turn everything upside down. In order to not scare people, we'll even put on ridiculous makeup. Sometimes we'll dress up as a traveling circus, sometimes we'll dress up as a stage play with an epic story, and sometimes we'll even go into battle naked. At that time, there'll even be a market and a float show. Gradually, in the mouths of the living, it became a strange undead sacrifice, Sulphur Mountain City's signature holiday, Ghost Festival. When talking about the past, it was inevitable that people would sink into their past memories. Heloise nodded thoughtfully as I sank into the hallway of my memories. You really do have a scheme. Can't you just say it openly? You can tell? I heard you say it already. It's so obvious, how could I not know? I'm afraid that those hounds of yours already know what's going on. Yep, even if I don't say it, they'll understand. In this generation, since the Mist Kingdom has already been revived, it's too pitiful to still celebrate Ghost Festival or Annihilation Day on the Annihilation Day. From now on, there'll only be Day of Peace celebration, which represents victory and peace. Since I intend to walk out of the shadows of the past and look forward, I naturally hope that they can do the same. You're so willful and selfish. I shrugged, but I didn't deny it. I was self-conscious about that. Every year's celebration is different, but I believe that since my intentions have been expressed, my knight definitely won't disappoint me. Bastion's rolling ball performance is the finale of every year's celebration. Then, here's the question, beautiful Princess Heloise, are you willing to walk together with a selfish fellow like me at the celebration? It should be quite enjoyable. Bowing slightly and lifting the hem of her skirt, the young golden-haired princess showed a pure smile as she performed an ancient courteous etiquette. Of course, esteemed Prince Roland. It's my honor to be your companion at the celebration. Chapter 233. Roland missed. Strength 32, plus 10, Agility 22, Constitution 22, Intelligence 29, Will 20, Charm 19. Talent abilities. War Angel form, Sinful Demon God form, Sword of Order, Titan body, Phantom feet, Divine Child, Barrier of Chaos. Basic job class. Level 60 Order Knight / Level 60 Chaos Witch King / Level 10 4 Elemental Swordcaster. Advanced job class. Level 3 Lord of Winter. Overall level 91. Actual combat power. Level 100. System evaluation. An excellent meat shield capable of directly facing off against an immemorial dragon. A gold-ranked novice who can rival legend-ranked warriors. If you really want to find a time dragon to prove me wrong, that's fine too. Compared to before, my stats didn't change much. As a strength-type job, the increase in strength was quite satisfactory. That semi-god equipment that I obtained from Omdaroken also increased my power from the very foundation. It could be said that it changed my attack style. The only unfortunate thing was that this equipment's bonus caused my strength to break past 30. It didn't give me any qualitative improvement, nor did it activate any racial talent. But as a melee fighter, strength was still the foundation, and the benefits of this increase were all round. Super heavy Dragon Knight armor, super long spears that could be used against giants, handheld dragon breath cannons, single-use crossbows, and so on. Even if I didn't consider the increase in attack power from actual combat, I could still try out these heavy equipment that normal people wouldn't be able to use. The additional talent ability for agility, Phantom Feet, was an incredibly unique ability that allowed me to teleport to the shadow plane for a short period of time and then teleport back. But no matter how I thought about it, apart from escaping, this ability really didn't seem to have any other use. Not to mention, I hadn't had a single chance to use this ability before. But for me, since I had already chosen the path of a two-handed magic swordsman, agility was more of an aid to my strength. Perhaps due to my heavy equipment, it didn't seem to have much of an advantage in combat, but without it, it would become a fatal weakness. Intelligence was doubtlessly the most important stat for a spellcaster. Logically speaking, I had improved quite a bit in my magic cultivation during this period of time, so I should have improved as well. However, just like how 19 to 20 represented the distance between a mortal and a legend, 30 represented the distance between a legend and a saint or myth rank. Without a fundamental change, it would be difficult for me to improve any further. However, the more difficult the hurdle, the greater the rewards would be once I passed it. Divine Sin Ice, Frigid Winter Earth, the repaired Ice Treader's Soul Imprint, Origin Magic, Hibernation Chill, and the 4 Elemental Sword Seal. Over the course of such a long period of time, I had actually accumulated far more knowledge in magic than any other warrior. Basic stats would directly affect the effects of magic and skills. The magical knowledge and martial arts techniques that I obtained would also have a negative effect on my basic stat. All my hard work would finally pay off, and I was filled with anticipation for the rewards I expected after I broke through my bottleneck. Willpower was the main stat for a priest job class. It was related to the ability to communicate with the gods, as well as the ability to comprehend faith and the teachings of the true God. Naturally, it was also related to the power of divine arts, as well as resistance to negative curses and mental magic. Originally, this was the most useless ability I had, but the chaos barrier that I had awakened under the pressure of a divine domain had become an incredibly useful defensive ability. Chaos barrier protects one's existence from the pressure of a divine domain or soul world. Reduces the effectiveness of will type and illusory abilities. Willpower had always been the most difficult to improve, and there was no other way to improve it. The more one was blessed by a god, the faster their willpower would improve. There were far too many priests who were stuck at the peak of the gold rank. In fact, there was even a saying that the gods needed to use their own divine power in order for a priest to break through to the legend rank. Actually, Roland's understanding wasn't complete. Willpower was the ability to control one's self. Willpower was the only stat that would forever follow one's soul. The cycle of death and reincarnation was the only shortcut to increasing the barrier. I thought about how those old priests with long hair and beards would be stuck at the legend rank for their entire lives. Yet I, a job class that completely ignored willpower, actually managed to break through this barrier. If word of this spread, those pitiful old priests would probably be angered to death. Apart from the chaos barrier talent, after that god's descent, I also obtained a new talent called Child of God. However, it was a useless talent that could be said to be useful or useless. It was a passive ability that could change one's physical body. It could reduce the damage that a god's descent would do to the physical body and greatly increase the success rate of a god's descent. Finally, the charm stat was also a comprehensive stat. It didn't only represent one's physical appearance. It also represented one's personality, status, and reputation. It would often have a subtle effect when dealing with others. For example, if someone who was beautiful did the same job, they would receive more rewards. Even though they were all students who started working at the same time, some people would quickly get along with others, while others would never be able to find any friends. Fine, this analogy seemed rather inappropriate, but that was the basic meaning. Although this might be useful to some people, it was actually meaningless to me, so let's not talk about it. It wasn't that I was envious of Heloise's 33 points of charm. In less than 2 short years, I had reached such a level. Although I had experienced many dangers and almost died several times, I was still quite satisfied with my gains. Obtaining frigid winter earth this time could be said to be an explosive increase in my accumulation. Reaching the gold rank also allowed me to clearly plan my future development path. All that was left was to persevere to the end. And right now, the little troublemaker before me was also my opponent to test my sword on. By the way, just how did she create this devil forest in the earth elemental plane? Isn't this a barren land of the air and water elements? Plants didn't have as many living conditions as ordinary people expected. However, in order for a seed to germinate into a mature embryo, it would require basic necessities like air, water, soil, and nutrients. It was obvious that there was nothing here apart from soil. I had no idea how she managed to create this forest. A soul world? Or something even more troublesome? Perhaps this was the only explanation I could come up with. Invading a soul world for no reason would be the equivalent of declaring war against a saint-ranked existence. And soul worlds would likely have their own instinctive reaction mechanisms. To be honest, I didn't want to step into this domain at all. As the former Truth Overseer and a member of the Mage Country's highest council, Amelia was at the peak of all mortal mages, a semigod. Not only that, she was a veteran semigod who had reached the semigod rank 200 years ago. Nobody knew just how much power she had. If she hadn't been killed by Omdoroken but instead died because of her own teammates, that would have been rather foolish no matter how I looked at it. Not only was this possible, it was quite high. At the very least, as long as any one of the 3 virtues appeared, It was highly likely that I would die since I was unable to use frigid winter earth. Oh my, so troublesome. Amelia, remember to thank me. I resheathed my silver holy light sword on my back. Holy light and the power of law were obviously ineffective against these berserk plants that were brimming with the power of nature. My twin swords of ice and snow were already in my hands. The power of ice was becoming easier and easier to wield. This represented the harshest nature, and it was also effective against plant. The moment I took a step forward, it was as if I had stepped on a boundary. All the wild plants in the mountain suddenly came to life, and the demonized forest issued an order to expel the uninvited guests. Damn it, I really shouldn't have given you something like Plants vs. Zombies. Also, Amelia, when did you join the evil cult of multi-cannon? It would be quite unsightly for anyone to be pointed at by a mountain full of cannons. These weren't cute cuties from the original game. These were demonized peas that were as tall as 2 people, and their cannons alone were the size of several basketballs. Not only that, they were specially made to fire multiple shots in rapid succession. Asterisk boom. Asterisk asterisk boom. Asterisk alright then, the sky was covered in bullets, making it impossible to dodge. However, this wasn't even the most dangerous part. Before we even got close, the gigantic mandala plants reached out their arms and dug themselves out. They screamed and cursed as if they were about to die as they charged towards us. Chili peppers? Spicy peppers can kill people if they enter their bodies? Stop joking around. Amelia unhesitatingly rejected the original version of pepper bombs. These cursed mandala plants became the best self-destruct landmines. Did I just shoot myself in the foot again? However, before they could even get close, they were suddenly frozen into ice by a sudden cold wind, which then shattered into pieces. Biting northern wind. The sword energy from my ice sword transformed into a bone-chilling wind that froze the incoming trouble. I casually swung my sword, and the cold air that leaked out transformed into floating icicles in preparation for the upcoming battle. For the 4 elemental swordcasters, imbuing their magic swords with sword seals was the most basic of all basics. As for my opponents, the most dangerous part of their magic swords was no longer the sharpness of their sword. Biting Beifong, I didn't expect you to care so much about him. When I heard this, my feet slipped and I almost made a fool of myself. However, the next moment, I finally believed in Beifong's jealousy and sarcasm about my naming sense, and I immediately made up my mind to change the name of this technique. How about biting southern wind? Or cold wind? Spring wind? Harmonious wind? Just because it's from the frigid cold earth, it's called biting Beifong? What's with the last few ridiculous names? As long as you think they're good, I won't comment on them. Then don't look at me with pity and don't say it out loud. This pity is even more glaring. Even I feel like I'm truly pitiful. While we were chatting casually on the battlefield, some people couldn't bear to watch it any longer. Mandala plants actually sprouted out from under our feet, but we didn't notice. Asterisk thump. Asterisk that was the sound of my head colliding with ice. These hidden assassins didn't seem to notice that I had long since frozen the entire area. The place I'm stepping on is the extreme north. I lightly stepped on the ground and the white under my feet spread out. The rapidly expanding snow transformed the surroundings into my territory. From the moment I obtained that world of ice and snow, from the moment I obtained the Ice Treader's soul imprint, my combat path had already been determined. The accumulated snow that slowed me down was my trap, the fierce wind that carried the blizzard was my weapon, the icicles that suddenly fell from the sky were my assassins, and even the glaciers that froze everything was an extension of my will. The extreme north that I constructed was my castle and fortress. From the moment I stepped onto my territory, my opponent would become the enemy of this world. I walked slowly, ignoring the cannonballs shot by the pea shooters that filled the sky. They would be frozen in midair, stealing away all the heat and time to circulate. Those man-eating flower demons that attacked me turned into exquisite ice flowers before they could even get close, decorating this world once again. Although the area effect isn't bad, the area is actually too large, and it seems like it consumes too much energy. How much longer can you last? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? Around 15 minutes. But if that is done, then I can directly extract the ice and freezing air from there. That would basically be zero energy consumption. What an extravagant mana user. I didn't know when, but Heloise had already put on a heavy fox fur coat. That furry tiger fur hat even had a pair of lively gem-like eyes. The most outrageous thing was that this fellow was actually hugging a cup to warm herself while nagging. Judging from the heat, fragrance, and color, it was top-notch hot cocoa. Initially, I didn't feel that I was cold, but looking at her like that, I somehow remembered the frostbite that I suffered not too long ago. My back started shivering and my teeth couldn't help but chatter, so, confiscated, I snatched the cup over and sniffed the sweet fragrance. Then, I raised my head and gulped it down. Hey, this is mine. Forget it, there's no end to bickering with you. Unable to snatch it back even if I stood on my tiptoes, Heloise sighed helplessly. Then, she immediately conjured another cup. Having a cup of warm cocoa down my throat on such a cold day was truly wonderful, but right after that, I felt like something was wrong as a strange taste churned in my stomach. Then, I heard my system's schadenfreude. Food God achievement +1. System notification. I already told you not to steal lollipops while you were at it. You deserve it. Cough, cough, what's this smell? It's too sweet, and there's a strange smell. It's so choking. Heloise's special hot cocoa. It's a special concoction with fragrant catnip and catnip. Would you like another cup? Seeing me retch, Heloise actually had a concerned expression as she handed me another cup. Smelling that overly pungent fragrance, my stomach felt even more uncomfortable. Looking at Heloise sticking out her tongue to slowly lick that terrifying special drink, and recalling that terrifying taste, my face couldn't help but twitch. Perhaps it was because she had been in cat form for too long, and that was the first time she had obtained a new sense of taste after so many years. Her sense of taste had obviously been distorted. Not to mention, she always had the ability to mysteriously take out strange items. From the moment she revived, she seemed to be more and more similar to that strange blue earless cat. Magic pet. Heloise greed. Race? This is a combination of golden elves, slimes, divine sins, ice calamity, and banshees. How do you define her bloodline? She's probably a living human. Strength. 6. Lolas have 3 good points, a slender body and a soft waist that makes it easy to push over. Agility. 7. With such low agility, she can even perform a fall on flat ground for you. Clumsy girls are actually quite cute. Stamina. As your soulbound equipment, she won't die as long as you don't die, so don't worry and use the Lolas as a meat shield. However, you'll have to be careful of the Lolas milk teeth afterward. Intelligence. 40. Yes, she's much smarter than you. In front of her, you're just an idiot, so don't play cards or make bets with her. Yep, I'm not mocking you for playing cards with your own magic pet yesterday and losing even your underwear. Will. 29. She hates the gods and refuses to accept the gifts of any god. Charm. 33. This is a beauty that can charm all mortals. Class. LV60 Mage / LV20 All Class Archmage / LV10 Great Sage of Magic / LV10 Divine Sins, Mutated. Overall evaluation, 120+, Epic. Race ability. Special transformation, God tier, Splitting Greed Child Form, Legend, Shadow Shift, Ice of Calamity, Breath of Magic in the Bloodline. Talent ability. Special transformation, Epic tier transforming into a harmless cat is her weakest ability. The cute little Lolas is just a disguise for her cuteness. She has at least dozens of powerful transformations that can instantly kill gold rank beings. As your bound equipment, she can choose a weapon form to transform into. Currently, there are 2 forms available for you to choose: a staff, Breath of Death, or a magic sword, Ice of Calamity. Talent ability. Splitting Greed Child Form, Legendary Tier, splitting into a small child form of Greed. This child form inherits part of Heloise's abilities and attribute. As long as it's within a certain range, this child form will be completely under Heloise's control, acting as her eyes and ears. When one is unlucky, people always think that the black cat that brings misfortune is everywhere. However, for Heloise, being everywhere is not difficult at all. She will always take the form of a crow, a black cat, or a young girl with a venomous tongue to mock your bad luck. System evaluation. Although this ability has not improved, because Heloise's main body's power has greatly increased, the power of each child form has also skyrocketed. If you don't want to be torn apart by the sea of Lolas, don't offend her. A talent ability, Shadow Shift, Ice of Calamity. This is the talent ability of a divine sin. Please try not to use it in the mortal plane. Otherwise, system notification. Both of your ice auras are inseparable from Heloise. So, bring more catnip with you. Special bloodline ability, Breathing Magic in the Bloodline. As the race that created magic, the Golden Elves have unparalleled talent in magic. She will be able to analyze any magic spell as long as she looks at it twice. She will also be able to easily imitate and learn any spell much faster than the original. The system evaluation. This is your magical pet. But, without taking into account that cheat-like little world of yours, she is far stronger than you. Due to her undead body, she has been unable to reach the pinnacle. She has accumulated tens of thousands of years of magical knowledge, and now, she can finally use it. She is a living magical treasure trove. And now she is at her pinnacle. This was only her main basic stats and the talent abilities of her species. Heloise's strongest point was still her ridiculously large magical knowledge base. After she revived, all the magic spells that she had previously been unable to use due to her limited stats had been unlocked. Seeing this abnormal evaluation, the tragedy of me being inferior to a pet once again occurred. And it could be predicted that as my power level increased, her growth rate would only increase. Perhaps the difference in power between us would become even greater. Looking at the faintly discernible gigantic shadow in front of me, I thought of a good countermeasure. I've decided on you, Heloise. Close the door and release the cat. Meow. The silly loli came at me and took a huge bite. Don't misunderstand, Heloise didn't die. It was just that I was worried about the additional hat on my head. Chapter 234. In a faraway fairy tale, in an ancient kingdom, there was a forest of thorns. The demonized thorns there were as frightening as demons, blocking all gazes. Nobody knew that in that silent forest, there was a castle with a long history, and in the highest room of the castle, a beautiful sleeping beauty princess was sleeping. Pitiful as she was born beautiful, she was cursed by an evil witch. In the most beautiful years of her life, she fell into an eternal slumber. Only a prince from afar would be able to awaken her with a kiss filled with true love. She waited and waited. Several decades passed, but the prince didn't come. Several hundred years passed, but the prince who was late and lost finally found his way back. Heloise, if you give me any more random explanations, I'll hang you up as the narrator. I mean what I say. The little witch with a sharp tongue was hopping around in the dark forest. She would occasionally pick up precious plant materials and put them into her bag, just like a little girl picking mushrooms. However, the stories she added to the story made me speechless. You're right. Look at this forest. Isn't it exactly the same as in the fairy tale? Amelia was once a princess, and you're indeed a prince. This fairy tale has become reality. A heroic prince has overcome all obstacles to save her. This is every girl's childhood dream. You're Prince Roland. She's Princess Amelia Milan. This is the Thorns Kingdom from the fairy tale. I'm the kind fairy who guides the prince. The young fake lowly held the ice flower in her hands and revealed an expression of longing and even infatuation. She even grew a pair of fairy wings and started dancing lightly. Her love-struck smile made her seem like a young girl in the prime of her youth, whose IQ had dropped because she was in love. She seemed to have accidentally insulted something. Cough cough, don't mind her. She was quite happy, but I only felt a headache, chest pain, and stomach ache. This magical pet in front of me was far too troublesome. Although she was much livelier now that she had slightly let go of her grudge, and the gears of time that had been stagnant for countless years were beginning to turn again, the Banshee Queen of the past seemed to have some strange characteristics of a wild girl. However, if I was the one being teased, I probably wouldn't be happy. Now, no matter how realistic that guy's acting was, even if I didn't look at his constantly shaking tail and crafty gaze, I knew that he had been watching me make a fool out of myself from the very beginning, even if I didn't look at his constantly shaking tail and crafty gaze. Of course it's the same. Isn't the main culprit of the Thorns Forest, the evil witch from the Sleeping Beauty fairy tale, right in front of me? Right, this fairy tale is different from other fairy tales. Even the evil boss isn't defeated at the end. Is it because they can't do anything to Amelia? That's why the prince and princess are living happily together. Yep, a lousy ending. It seems that I've become wiser once again and unknowingly discovered the truth. Please call me Roland with sharp eyes. You're still as shameless as ever. The little fairy was finally unable to keep up her act and landed on my shoulder. However, I tightly gripped my white frost sword. Since Heloise wasn't playing anymore, it could only mean that new trouble had come knocking on my door. What's it this time? You don't want to know. Fine, you already know. How could I not know? How could she be so big? Did Amelia steal the elves' ancient tree of life? A normal large treant would typically be around 4 to 10 meters tall, no matter how strong they were. They could only be said to be on the same level as giants. However, the gigantic treant before me was even taller than the Titan giants. At the very least, the deterrence he gave me was in no way inferior to that little yellow duck. The gigantic treant slowly walked over. Every time he took a step, the earth would violently respond to his footstep. The magical plants would scatter in all directions as if they were fleeing for their lives. When he got closer and I could see clearly, I accidentally dropped my sword as I stared in astonishment at the giant before me. Ha ha, look at that face. It's exactly the same as you. Alright then, the silly cat was actually rolling around on my shoulder in laughter. However, I could only helplessly look at the gigantic treant. Wasn't that wooden face that seemed to have been carved out by a knife exactly me? Ha 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 ha, you're actually still naked? It would seem that all of Cairo will be able to see your naked body. I'm dying of laughter, I'm dying of laughter. That's right, the treant wasn't wearing any clothes. When I took a closer look, his body proportions were actually quite similar to mine. The only difference was that he had some extra tree bark skin. From afar, it really did seem like I was the one fighting him. Amelia, you bastard! What the hell are you thinking? I angrily roared as I picked up my sword and charged at the treant with all my might. Cough, I take back my original words. I turned around and ran halfway through my charge. Run as fast as you can. Ha! I'm laughing so hard I can't breathe. Let me rest for a bit. Why are you running? Kill him. Do you really want your naked body to be spread all over the world? I'm not even as tall as his toe. Slashing at him would be no different from being bitten by a mosquito. Have you ever heard of a mosquito killing an elephant? That's impossible. Roland! The treant's angry roar created a huge gust of wind behind me. I simply didn't run, but the moment I started running, the treant actually chased after me while shouting like a resentful housewife. While I was running for my life, the little fairy was giggling on my shoulder. Her soul world is a projection of her inner world. Look at how much she thinks of you. You're definitely the most important existence in her heart. Important? Important? I glanced at the astonishingly heavy treant behind me. From a certain standpoint, this was definitely correct. I gritted my teeth and suddenly grabbed the little fairy, who was still nagging. Then, I suddenly stopped, turned around, and threw her away like I was throwing a javelin. You're the one, Heloise. Go. Big guy, take a look at my lowly meat shield. Alright then, my system's notification was still effective. Heloise was indeed quite tanky, but the prerequisite was that she was obedient. While I was flying, Heloise unhesitatingly returned in her raven form and used her beak to snipe at my head. I now had a new enemy to chase after, but this was only the beginning of my nightmare. I couldn't even find an end to this forest's secret realm. That tower-like dandelion opened up. So many flower buds. It's so beautiful. Beautiful my ass. That's a magical bomb. It's a cluster bomb. Hurry and dodge. The beautiful silver dandelion took advantage of the wind and scattered its seeds into the world. The seeds had wings and slowly floated in the air, but when they landed, they created a mushroom cloud. A beautiful rose? What's this? She transformed and actually threw out flower petals. She actually cut through the tree trunk. Are these blades? What's this? It smells so good. Rose Harvester. Her instantaneous explosive power is comparable to a gold-ranked archer. She also has a certain level of melee combat ability. Don't ask about that fragrance. Forget it, since we didn't die on the spot, this level of poison can't do anything to us. The bright red rose field was more than large enough to form a plane. The incense in the air was actually a poison that could instantly kill a semi-dragon-class dragon. Yet, we were still fine, and we didn't even feel anything. This could only mean that our biological structure couldn't even be considered human anymore. What's that? An apple bomb? Don't get close. It's an apple that eats humans. It loves eating human kidneys. The red apples that were humming little apples and jumping over to the beat of the music were the scariest type of mental pollution. The moment someone touched them, they would even scream, "Don't touch me. I'm expensive. You can't afford to pay me back," and attack the enemy physically and mentally. Roland, this is definitely one of your disgusting designs. I won't deny it. A sunflower field? It's so beautiful. Hurry and lower your heads. Sunflower laser cannon. Anyone who uses it will know. Absorbing the sun's energy, purifying it, and using their magical cores to focus and shoot it out was the only way these magical sunflowers could attack. If there was only one sunflower, it would only be a light burn. However, there was an endless field of sunflowers in front of us. Not to mention, these high heat rays were highly suitable for stacking on top of each other. It would definitely be quite pitiful to be hit. Damn it, what else is there? The strange plants that were still in my imagination and design had all been transformed into reality. Now that we reached this field, I was starting to worry about Amelia. This seemed to have exceeded the limits of her abilities. If it wasn't that her power level had suddenly increased exponentially, then something was wrong with her. There would always be a price to pay for exceeding one's abilities. No matter how many trump cards Amelia had, this soul world before us was far too ridiculous. Amelia's current condition wasn't quite normal. I hope she's fine. I silently quickened my pace. Our long journey was finally coming to an end. However, when we reached our destination, I was once again astonished. In the depths of the bramble forest, there's an ancient white jade castle. There's a staircase made of white jade that leads all the way to the top of the tower. The prince, who finally managed to overcome all the obstacles, is now hesitating. When the silly cat started explaining again, I didn't even know how to stop her. That was because what was in front of us was a typical fairy tale castle. When we got closer, just like in the fairy tale, the black brambles sealing the castle automatically retreated and opened up a path for us. Let's go. Why are you just sitting there? Let me calm down and mentally prepare myself. I feel like the developments are going to be quite ridiculous. At least let me prepare myself for my worldview to be ruined. The developments were becoming more and more ridiculous. If it wasn't for the fact that the way back was also going to be ridiculous, I would have long since turned around and left. Do I even need you to tell me that? Is there anyone who's related to you that isn't ridiculous? The system notification, go. The King of Gentlemen is watching you. Alright, which one should I comment on? Was it Heloise, who always hit me when I was down, or was it my system, who always added insult to injury? Why can't there be more normal people by my side? Because you yourself are abnormal. While I was still debating whether or not I should go around in circles, Caro's mage headquarters was already bustling with activity. Not a single city's domain lord would be able to tolerate a forest suddenly appearing in their own city, especially when their own people mysteriously entered the forest and never returned. Fortunately, Cade, who was the highest-ranked person in the Earth Elemental Plane, guessed what had happened the moment he saw a forest appear in the Earth Elemental Plane and did his best to stabilize the situation. Those lords have long since reached the limit of their tolerance for teacher Amelia. If she's caught doing some forbidden experiment or causing major trouble, she'll at the very least be stripped of her status as a teacher. Even though Cade did his best to suppress the news out of consideration for their past friendship, he only told the public that this was a special experiment. However, the Earth Elemental Plane was about to restore its connection with the Earth Elemental Plane. At that time, the Earth Elemental Plane would definitely send a special envoy to understand the situation. That abnormal forest was still there, so it was impossible to hide it. Is there still no news from Teacher Amelia? What's the result of her divination magic? Is there still no result? Is she trapped in her own soul world? Divination about a person or an item's location was one of the few reliable divination magic spells out there. His two disciples exchanged glances, not knowing how to respond. In the end, Aditya furrowed his eyebrows and told them the inconceivable result of his divination. The result of our divination was that Teacher Amelia isn't in that forest. This was obviously another yes or no multiple-choice question, but this answer obviously exceeded Cade's expectations. It was common sense that a soul world couldn't be separated from its master's existence. Could it be that this forest wasn't a soul world? What's strange is that when we asked if Teacher Amelia was in this city, the result of our divination was that she was. In the end, we narrowed down the location of the divination, but the result was still that forest. Finally, we considered a possibility, and the result of our divination proved that it was a completely incomprehensible conclusion. Hearing this, bean-sized beads of sweat rolled down Cade's forehead. He had already guessed that possibility. You're saying that that forest is, deep within the forest, someone came to the same conclusion. That's right, that forest is Amelia herself. These countless magical plants are all part of her body, and this entire black forest is her complete form. She's crazy. Can her own body be modified like this? You have the cheek to talk about her? Aren't we all the same? We've long since ceased to be human. Chapter 235. Amelia Milan was born in the year 145 AD. She was the third princess of the Bardi Empire's direct line of descent. She was intelligent from a young age, and went to the mage country of Arladent to learn magic when she was only 5 years old. After her younger brother inherited the throne, she abandoned her status as the elder princess and became a teacher in the Cloud Tower. The Bardi Empire would forever recognize her as royalty, and she was currently ranked 67th in the line of succession to the throne. If one were to look up the Bardi Empire's information, they would find that Amelia was nothing more than these meaningless descriptions. But actually, there was only one word in the earliest records of her, which, ever since she was young, she was viewed as a freak. She wasn't as noisy as other children, and she always sat by herself without crying or laughing, just like a puppet. Even her birth mother and the people around her suspected that she had some kind of mental problem, and when she first opened her mouth, it caused a lot of trouble. "Mother, why did you kill those little cuties in the garden? They screamed so pitifully, and why did everyone ignore their pleas for help? Didn't you tell me to help the weak?" The young Amelia was unable to understand why those cruel adults with scissors would harm those little lives that kept screaming. Even if they screamed so pitifully, no one would help them. Perhaps it's because they're too young that no one heard them. Since no one heard them, let me help them. And so, she took action herself. "Uncle Tree, please help everyone. Take care of that bad guy with the scissors." Just as everyone was going wild with joy over the princess' sudden voice, misfortune arrived. Just a single whisper from a young child and a small command caused the gigantic oak tree to transform into a man-eating tree demon that devoured all the enemies in the garden. "Save me! Guards, where are the guards? Ah, there's a monster eating people." The sudden appearance of the tree demons in the royal garden caused panic. Amidst the chaos, only the young princess was exceptionally eye-catching. She smiled sweetly at the trees in the garden. "Relax, Amelia won't allow anyone to bully you." Meanwhile, the flowers and trees in the garden trembled slightly. Flower petals and pine cones fell into Amelia's palm, as if they were small gifts, as if thanking Amelia for her kindness. To Amelia, this was only a voluntary help. But to everyone else, the little princess caused a calamity the first time she opened her mouth. With just a few words, she summoned a tree demon to eat the pitiful and innocent gardener. Back then, there were at least several hundred people in the royal garden. In their eyes, Amelia, who stepped on the gardener's corpse and blood to greet the plants, was the purest of abnormalities. Even with His Imperial Majesty's strict orders, the rumor that the third princess was a witch still spread like wildfire. Every time Amelia walked on the streets, she could see looks of fear, disgust, and criticism. "Look, that's the cursed witch." The first thing she said was a curse. What a terrifying gaze. "Don't look over here," she glared at me. "Am I cursed? Now there are rumors that I'm also a witch. It's all because of this freak that His Imperial Majesty loathed me." Even Amelia's mother, who was the concubine, loathed her second daughter. Back then, the Bardi Empire's royal authority wasn't stable. In fact, political enemies used this as an excuse to attack the unstable royal family, which made His Imperial Majesty even more annoyed. He had 5 children to begin with, so he didn't like this strange daughter to begin with. He even had thoughts of exiling her. Originally, under the pressure from both inside and outside, especially from her parents' loathing, the best outcome for Amelia would have been to be sent to a monastery to live the rest of her life alone. In fact, she was even sent to the Earth God Church in Zydril to be a candidate for a saintess. That was a job that she was destined to be chaste for the rest of her life. But fortunately, the court Archmage Antonius of that time vouched for her. "She's no witch. She just has the talent for communicating with plants. This child is practically born to be a mage. Little Amelia, are you willing to go with Grandpa to Arladent to learn magic? There, you'll meet many friends just like you." Amelia unhesitatingly nodded as she looked at the fearful or disgusted gazes around her and felt the kindness of the old man before her. That's right, from the very start, everyone had underestimated Amelia's abilities. She didn't simply have the ability to communicate with plants. Her natural talent was simply the concept of communication. No matter if it was a plant or an animal, she could communicate with them through her mind. Others might think of her as a strange child who didn't know how to speak or feel troubled, but in reality, she was constantly communicating with everything around her through her own ability. This time, her pure God-given ability was far too powerful, which wasn't necessarily a good thing. The purer a life was, the simpler their consciousness would be. The more desires they had, the more distracting thoughts and evil thoughts they had, which made Amelia feel quite uncomfortable. Her ability wasn't to read minds. She was only able to communicate directly. If one had to describe her ability, it would be more accurate to describe it as seeing through the other party's desires. Amelia hated her own maids. Their empty minds were filled with nothing but money and rumors. She hated her older and younger brothers. Their immature bodies were filled with male desires and ambitions. She even hated her own mother and father. Her mother only treated her as a tool to obtain love, while her mother was busy with scheming and scheming every day. The majestic royal palace was filled with filth. Later on, Amelia even began to hate humans. She hated even those creatures filled with desires. Plants only needed sunlight, water, and nutrients to survive. This actually became her safe haven. She would often avoid anyone and wander around the botanical garden. She wouldn't even return home late at night, which actually solidified her identity as a witch. When Amelia decided to leave her homeland and go to the mage country to become a mage, the joy, and other emotions from her family made her never want to return to her homeland. Perhaps things will be different in the mage country. At the very least, I won't be the only strange one. Unfortunately, humans were still humans. They had more desires, more ambitions, and more expectations. For Amelia, humans were just like aliens that she couldn't understand. But this time, as she grew older and more mature, she learned how to hide her true self, making it so that she wasn't too strange. Her natural talent in communication helped her progress in plant magic by leaps and bounds. Magic had always been a process of searching for the truth. Since she had the talent in communication, her rate of growth was basically cheating. Soon, before she turned 20, she became the youngest high-level mage in her generation. Her experience as a candidate for a holy maiden in the Earth God Church in Zydril, apart from giving her an enemy who killed her adopted mother, also made her hate men even more. But no matter how far she progressed, nothing fundamentally changed. She was still that witch who loathed humans. Her so-called stormy mood didn't refer to her changing moods when facing strangers. This was simply because she was able to see through other people's evil intentions with a single glance. Her loathing of humans and her love for simple life forms caused her values to deviate slightly. In her mind, simple and cute plants were far more valuable than dirty humans. In fact, she even began to hate her own identity as a human. That was why, in order to get closer to her own perfect existence, she unhesitatingly used her colleagues and acolytes as experimental data for her own transformation. True lunatics believed that the world had gone insane, and that they were the only normal ones. If this standard was used to evaluate Amelia, then she was doubtlessly a complete lunatic. She always believed that she was the only normal person. I have no friends, no enemies, they're all dead, no lovers. I don't have those annoying bipedal creatures. What a delightful life. Just as she sealed herself in her own world, believing that this was the complete picture of her life, a new student entered her line of sight. He was the Roland from back in the day. Ah, there's actually such a pure person. Don't misunderstand. The Roland from back in the day had just crawled out of his grave. He definitely wasn't pure out of kindness. He had just been betrayed by the entire human society, so he was filled with pure hatred and hatred towards the entire world. Even though he was smiling so brightly, his desire was only pure destruction and revenge. Not only that, his hatred wasn't directed at a single person, but it was directed at all humans. Ah, this is so beautiful. There's no need for scum like humans to live in this world. This world doesn't need any saviors. Just let everything be destroyed. This is such a brilliant way of thinking. From a certain standpoint, it was Roland from back in the day who created this insane witch. Roland, who viewed humans as nothing more than ants that were about to die, had no idea that he had become a source of pollution that constantly radiated hatred. And when Amelia chose Roland as her acolyte, the two of them, who both hated humans, started working together. On the surface, one was researching ice magic, while the other was researching plant magic. However, one was actually researching undead magic, while the other was researching the even more forbidden fusion of plants and animals. Neither of them had any moral limits, and they influenced each other, falling deeper and deeper into their relationship. For the Amelia from back in the day, Roland was a rare friend and confidant. He was the only existence in this world that she could calmly communicate with. Unknowingly, she had fallen deeper and deeper into his relationship than she had expected. Although plants were simple, they lacked intelligence. It was already good enough that they could listen to what she had to say. It would be impossible for them to react in any way. Humans were naturally social creatures. They desired to communicate and to be recognized and trusted by others. Even Amelia, who believed that she was used to being alone, was no exception. After Amelia, who had been alone for more than a century, opened her heart, she treated her confidant quite well. She was also willing to impart magical knowledge to him. In fact, she was even a bit naggy and insane. And indeed, Roland benefited greatly from this. And when I obtained what I needed and obtained the power to take revenge, I unhesitatingly sold Amelia before I left. I obtained the power to take revenge and decided to set out on my journey of revenge. While studying at the Cloud Tower, Roland also made some true friends. Although his desire for revenge had never wavered, he unhesitatingly reported Amelia for the sake of Cade and his other friends' safety. Of course, Amelia was unable to understand such feelings. She was just very strange, so strange that she couldn't understand it. Why did he betray me? Why did he betray me without any care? He didn't have any anger, hatred, or ambition. He didn't even have the possibility of obtaining any benefit. He basically said, "The sun is rising in the east, so it's probably going to rain. I'm in a good mood today, so I should report Amelia." He betrayed me with such a natural attitude. Was it because I was also a human? Because I was also a part of his hatred? Roland's departure and despair caused Amelia to sink into complete confusion. Perhaps not long after that, she completely abandoned her human identity. Perhaps it had something to do with this thought. After Amelia finished dealing with her own troubles, she confidently planned to go find Roland for revenge. However, she received news of her acolyte's death. Amelia, who had always been cold and aloof, encountered a wave of emotions for the first time. However, it wasn't the joy she expected. She was angry, unwilling, despairing, disappointed, and sad. She discovered to her astonishment that her heart was aching. It wasn't because of the pain of being betrayed, but rather the pain of losing the only person who truly understood her. That pain was like having her flesh dug out of her body and tormented her for a very long time. She thought about how she would never be able to see that hateful person again. She would never be able to see that fake smile again. She would never be able to find a gaze that would understand her again. She thought about how she would never be able to open up and confide in others again. She thought about how she would forever lose her only home. For the first time in her life, Amelia felt pain in her heart. However, she didn't know where her heart was. That year, Amelia regretted giving up her human physical body for the first time ever. She lost the right to cry. From that day onwards, Amelia's time was stopped. She was still alive, but that was all. She once again placed herself in a box where no one else existed, and used a false mask to deal with everyone. Yet, more than 300 years later, fate allowed this pair of lovebirds to reunite. Amelia's time gear began to spin once more. However, this time, Amelia was once again at a loss as to what to do. She expected that when Roland saw her again, he would be surprised, afraid, or even run away. However, although Roland indeed acted like he wanted to run away, and he never stopped complaining about his appearance, Amelia's ability told her that he was happy. He was happy to see her again. He liked seeing her, and he was happy to be reunited with her. At that moment, all the hatred and dissatisfaction she had accumulated for more than 100 years vanished like smoke. Amelia almost laughed out loud as her heart was filled with happiness. In the end, she could only force herself to threaten Amelia. At that moment, Amelia finally came to a realization. She understood her own inner feelings. So, I do like him, researching plant magic? Everything was just an excuse and a false reason. I want to be by his side was the true reason. Does he already have a girlfriend? Anyways, I just want a friend. Yep, it's fine as long as I feel comfortable by his side. Her powerful pride caused her to give up on trying to compete for Roland's attention. In fact, she wasn't even willing to show her own feelings. Being his confidant was enough for her. That was the reason she used to numb herself. And the fact that she wanted to learn how to cook was nothing more than another way of showing her unwillingness to admit defeat. However, that reason that even she didn't believe in had been shattered by a certain reckless person. Amelia had never been able to confuse Amelia from the very start. She only needed 1 second to understand everything. However, Amelia herself was shaken by this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. As long as I accept, no, as long as I don't forcefully refuse, we'll be a couple. He'll even be the one who's actively pursuing me. In the end, Amelia made her choice. She was even a part of the rapidly spreading scandals. At the very least, the rumors that reached Eliza as if they had wings had something to do with her. Even Amelia herself didn't know why she did all this. Perhaps she could only barely come up with one reason. She instinctively used her own method to declare war against Roland, hoping to have a proper duel. But after that duel, her overly shaken heart caused her to sink into hesitation and confusion. I don't even have a normal physical body. It's impossible for me to have a normal child. Will he mind? I have such a terrible reputation and I've done so many bad things. Will he hate me if he finds out? Although he only sees me as a friend, at least he's better than that Eliza. Roland only sees that girl as family, as if she's his own daughter. At the very least, Roland still sees me as a woman. Countless thoughts intertwined in her mind. She hadn't recovered from her injuries at Red Maple City, and she had also experienced a bitter battle against Onderoken. Amelia had worked even harder and sacrificed even more than what she had shown in the Earth elemental plane, which lacked water and air. Now that she was at her weakest, she also encountered a period of mental confusion, which caused her entire physical body to go out of control. Her berserk body revealed its true form, transforming into a pitch-black forest. Meanwhile, her own consciousness was like an ostrich that stuck its head into the ground, sinking into the deepest part of her consciousness into a deep sleep. I'll just continue sleeping like this. I won't have to worry about anything. What's Roland doing? Will he be sad when he finds out that I'm not here? Will he still be together with that little girlfriend of his? Will he forget about me? Forget about me, an idiotic woman who doesn't even dare to confess to him. Forget about me, an idiotic woman who doesn't even know how to do household chores. She had been floating in this sea of consciousness for an unknown amount of time. It wasn't that she had no way of controlling the situation, but rather that she had unconsciously given up control over her physical body due to her self-reproach and self-loathing. But finally, she heard a familiar knock on her door. "Hey, my sleeping beauty, it's time to wake up. If you keep sleeping, you're going to miss my birthday party. It's going to be a super awesome party. You'll definitely regret it if you miss it." Was this another hallucination? Why was this hallucination before her so realistic? That familiar smile seemed to contain a rare bit of sincerity. Yet, his joy and happiness at seeing her seemed so familiar. It was as if this unscrupulous acolyte had prepared breakfast and was about to wake up her teacher, who had stayed up all night doing experiments again. "Good morning, Roland." Amelia's face was red, and she didn't even know why she was saying such meaningless things. However, Roland paused in surprise when he heard her greeting, but then he smiled just like before. "Good morning, Amelia. I'm so happy to be able to see you again." The witch's face became red and hot, but her smile unknowingly appeared. She nodded slightly in a manner that was impossible to discern, but she was complaining in a voice that only she could hear. His intentions are so sly. This is practically against the rules. Chapter 236. Good morning, Amelia. I'm so happy to be able to see you again. Roland's smile was as dazzling as the sun. He was delighted from the bottom of his heart, and his warm embrace. For Amelia, who still didn't have enough self-awareness, this was an irresistible poison. Amelia immediately blushed and didn't even know what she was muttering. Embrace? That's right, Amelia was currently completely naked, with only a cloak covering her most important parts. She was lying in Roland's embrace. Put me down. Amelia discovered her current situation, but she still hadn't made any plans to take the next step. This witch, who still had no intentions of marrying, immediately started struggling. Don't move. Roland's angry roar suddenly scared her. This was the first time that Roland had ever lost his temper at her. Amelia paused in surprise as she watched his face get closer and closer. Could it be that he wants to? Roland seemed to be looking down at something. Even though he was still filled with astonishment and disbelief as he looked at the familiar face getting closer and closer, her body felt weak, and she couldn't muster any strength. For some reason, the girl suddenly lost the strength to resist. She could only watch as his face got closer and closer, as well as his hands still doing whatever they wanted on her body. You haven't confessed yet. I'm not that kind of person. At the very least, you should at least confess first and let me prepare myself. I hate that *T the most. She somehow regained some strength and viciously slapped Roland's face. If she was an ordinary girl, this would only be an act of shyness. However, a certain witch's arm strength had always been a mystery. Her shyness was more than enough to slay a dragon. Your body's fine. It's good that you're awake. Hurry up and control those rampaging. Alright then, a certain unlucky fellow who was treated as a pervert was directly slapped away. Only now did Amelia have the time to clearly see what was going on. She also understood what Roland didn't say in time. Since you're awake, stop watching the fun. Hurry up and control those crazy plants that are chasing us. The three virtues, the giant Roland Treant, the rose garden, and everyone else that could run and couldn't run had followed them here. If Amelia had woken up any later, Roland and the others would have been wrapped up like dumplings. Amelia was the core of this forest. When her consciousness was taken away by Roland, it was the same as having her heart taken away. Naturally, all the magical plants would chase after her with all their might, vowing to take back their main body. Realizing that she had misunderstood, Amelia wanted to find a hole to hide in. However, Harloise leisurely commented from the side. Heroine, you think too much. Alright, then she realized that her thoughts had been seen through by a third party. Amelia was really trying to dig a hole to bury herself. Since Roland was sent flying, the cloak that protected Amelia naturally fell to the ground. Currently, Amelia was only an amalgamation of consciousness. Although she was naked, only her upper body existed. Her lower body and waist were made up of rhizomes. There were also bark-like scales all over her body. It was obvious that she wasn't human. Amelia glanced at Roland in the distance and discovered that it was impossible for him to see her like this. For some reason, she heaved a sigh of relief. Now that Amelia had woken up, it was time for everything to return to solitude. The forest was shrinking, turning into numerous tributaries that flowed into the main stream. All the demonized lifeforms returned to seeds and concept. Soon, a new body appeared in front of them, and her hair covered the entire ground. The jade-green hair transformed into a grass-green carpet that was absorbing the entire demonized forest. Here, put this on. Heloise helped Amelia put on the white cloak that had fallen off. Amelia didn't mind putting it on too. As for Roland, he had to think of a way to dig himself out of the soil first. Why am I always the one who gets hurt? And when I finally managed to crawl out of the soil, I didn't even get to complain before Amelia rolled her eyes at me and hit me while I was down. Serves you right. It's all your fault. Although I didn't know what had happened, I had clearly done something good for once. Not only was I chased for half a night after working so hard to clear the dungeon, but I was also beaten up for no reason and even rolled my eyes at. I kept on feeling like I had accidentally offended someone. Could it be that the will of the universe hated me? That was why I was able to choke on water and fall over on flat ground. But seeing that Amelia was fine was still quite comforting. After all, it had been so many years, and I didn't really have many acquaintances. There were even fewer acquaintances who didn't have a deep grudge against me. Why was it that the more I thought about it, the more pitiful I felt? I still had friends. Although I hadn't contacted Cade for many years. Cade, did you forget about me long ago? I still had brothers. Although he had slashed me twice, Adam, do you intend to remember that for the rest of your life? I still had family. Cavendish in the Chaos Abyss. Bro, did you call me? And I had a girlfriend. Eliza, who was sharpening her sword. Heh, I'll be waiting for you to come back. Alright then, in order to avoid further stabbing myself in the back, I decided not to give any examples. In this day and age, Chunibu were the most popular, lone wolves were the best, and only dragons were the best sellers. Friends and whatnot weren't important at all. I really didn't envy those who had many friends. Yep, I had many friends, and I even had quite a few in this entire dimension. For example, Cade, such as a certain Cade, such as Beifong? System, are you asking me? I unhesitatingly deleted Beifong's name from my mind, as I recalled his new companion that was several hundred meters long. I did my best to bury him in the deepest recesses of my memory. Yep, it was about time for us to return, so the three of us should just leave. Beifong? Who was that? A native of this world? I had no impression of him at all. Aren't you being too heartless? Didn't he just help you this time? I do want to reward him. What do you think of the title of Highest Governor of the Mist Alliance's Donglan Principality Colony in the Earth Elemental Plane, Chief Military Officer, Translator, and 27 other positions, including Handyman? I think it's wonderful. He should be quite happy to stay in this world and enjoy life together with his little companions. This wasn't purely a joke. The process of war would always determine the future benefits of a region. After sacrificing so much to kill off Omdaroken, it would be an obvious waste to just turn around and leave, giving the benefits to others. With the other organization's bases here as evidence, this seemingly barren Earth elemental plane was actually a treasure trove of resources. Many special minerals that would be considered rare treasures in the mortal plane could be found everywhere here. It was just that no one would be willing to lower their heads and pick up rocks, so it would be quite valuable for an organization to set up a base here. But with the Mage Country's base in Cairo as an example, in order to defend against the frightening sandstorms, the city's defensive spell formations had to expend a considerable amount of energy. The soldiers stationed here couldn't be weaklings either, and the Mage Country also had to take care of the dimensional teleportation requirements. In order to set up a medium-sized base here that included gathering, transporting, mining, and military missions, it would require an astronomical amount of resources. Obviously, neither the Mist Alliance, which was still in the midst of preparations, nor the impoverished Donglan Principality would be able to fork out such a large sum of money. But by the time the Mist Alliance truly needed such resources, the most valuable areas in the Earth elemental plane would have already been claimed by others. At that time, it would be incredibly unrealistic for the Mist Alliance to want to occupy even a small portion of the Earth elemental plane. That's why, Beifong, your mission is to occupy the Earth elemental plane. You don't have to do anything, but it's enough as long as you let others see where you are. Yep, this was an obvious attempt to occupy the Earth elemental plane. As long as Beifong brought his sandworm army over and strolled around the Earth elemental plane, making his stance clear, I believed that the other factions wouldn't risk conflict with us to forcefully take over the Earth elemental plane. But while my idea was good, and my plan was feasible, many things would change in the end as long as Beifong was involved afterwards. I regretted my decision countless times. As expected, I couldn't rely on someone like Beifong at all. Beifong hadn't been in the Earth elemental plane for very long, and he had already come up with a devious idea to deal with my mission, even causing my reputation to be tarnished. What did he do? He made countless special signs for his followers and sandworms. The Mist Alliance's Donglan Principality Deputy Governor of the Earth elemental plane was an ancient sandworm that was charmed by Beifong. The Mist Alliance's Donglan Principality Deputy Governor of the Earth elemental plane was a gigantic earth spider. Then, all sorts of strange creatures were placed under Beifeng's sign. In the end, the entire Earth elemental plane became their base, a legendary holy land for evil cult. And it just so happened that the position of deputy governor that I casually mentioned really did have the power to give orders to other creatures. And so, all these strange creatures became members of the Mist Alliance. In the end, when we finally had the strength to open up this Earth elemental plane, not only did we have to face the strange gazes of other factions, as if they were looking at aliens, we also had to face even more of our strange allies. What? That sandworm is my superior? Apart from eating and digging holes, he doesn't think of anything else? There's no helping it. From an administrative standpoint, he's indeed your superior. However, the sandworm that we're talking about doesn't exist. Think about it from a different angle. Having a superior like this isn't bad at all. At the very least, he won't randomly order you around. Yep, just think about it seriously. Otherwise, you'll vomit blood in anger just like your predecessor. This was actually quite good. At the very least, that sandworm was quickly fired due to competition for the position. The other Earth elemental plane residents were even more diligent than the Earth elemental plane's employees. Plus, they were able to adapt to the local environment and were excellent at their work, which really made me speechless. The final result was that this Earth elemental plane became the shared home of both Earth elemental plane residents and outsiders. Every year, I even had to prepare an excellent employee trip to the mortal plane for them, which caused even more jokes and trouble. For example, I had to arrange a hot spring and giant brush for mega elemental giants to bathe in, and a salon to enjoy his own skiing trip. If I ever found out which bastard told them all this, I would definitely banish him to this plane to shovel sand for the rest of his life. The most troublesome part was that a certain Draken had started spouting nonsense here, leaving behind a religion similar to Buddhism called Great Love. This religion became a malignant tumor that spanned across countless dimensions. As for the founder of this religion, he was constantly on the wanted list. At the same time, this Earth elemental plane became the holy land and headquarters of that abnormal evil cult. Countless abnormal creatures would come here on a pilgrimage to exchange Beifeng's experiences. That's right, by that time, Beifeng had finally become a forbidden word. As for what exactly he was referring to it was better not to think too deeply about it. By the time I became the laughingstock of the Earth elemental plane and finally couldn't take it anymore and decided to strangle that damn Draken to death, he had long since disappeared. As for this fake position of governor, Beifeng had long since forgotten about it. From start to finish, Beifeng had only been in this position for a few days before a new beauty appeared and stole all of his attention, causing him to skip work for many years. Let's not talk about the future for now. At the very least, I was quite satisfied with my decision for now. Apart from this Draken, who was as tenacious as a Martian cockroach, I couldn't think of anyone else more suitable for this mission. Get that duck and stop at the place I marked out for you. I don't believe that anyone would dare to touch it. Relax, I've never gone back on my word. If you complete this mission well, you'll receive all the rewards I promised you. Yep, you're now the governor appointed by me. Do your best. After I finally dealt with the troublesome Beifong, I turned my attention to the two people near the teleportation portal. It seemed that they couldn't wait to return to the mortal plane. Hurry up and go back. I have a few new research projects that I want to start. The tall witch had already regained her previous gentle temperament. Under the parasol, she was leisurely reading the cooking manual, Complete Guide to Poisoning, as if she didn't care about anything. However, compared to her previous indifferent temperament, I always felt that there was something extra. Is there any point in talking so much to that guy? Do you really think that he'll do as you say? I guarantee that he'll immediately run away as soon as he's tired of the creatures in this plane. Alright then, Heloise's opinion was the same as mine, but could a fake loli like you stop eating candy on my neck? Even if you really want to eat candy, don't talk about it while eating. Your saliva is dripping onto my head. It's so dirty. Let's try everything we can. Right, Cade, that should be enough to bring it here. There's no need to. Alright then, I knew that I didn't say anything. This lolicon old geezer was currently happily looking at the lollipop on his head, as if he was already fascinated by it. His foolish expression and his posture of holding a lollipop in each hand completely destroyed his image as an archmage. At the very least, the disciples behind him were all covering their faces, not daring to look. Some of them were probably even beginning to wonder if they had entered the wrong school back in the day. After hesitating for a moment, I gave up on telling him that this fake loli was our famous strict teacher Heloise. Back in the day, Heloise had punished Cade by making him hang upside down in a public square because he had failed an exam. Not revealing his true identity would leave him with a beautiful memory. Cough, why are you being so polite? You actually rushed over to pay me back. I'm already quite happy that you're willing to pay me back 30,000 gold. How about I give you a discount? It's not easy to carry gold coins, so just give me a gold exchange certificate from the Goblin Bank. Only 3 gold coins. Oh no, not even a single gold coin. You almost tricked me again. I finally remember. You were the one who owed me money back in the day. How did it become me owing you money? TSK, you're so stingy. You've woken up the moment you heard about money. Let's just forget about such a small matter. Why didn't you forget? You still have the face to say it? You were like this back in the day as well. As we chatted about the present and the past, we couldn't help but laugh out loud. When old friends met, the closer it was to parting, the more they wanted to talk about it. In the end, under Amelia's urging gaze, it was finally time to part ways. Right, my term as a teacher is almost over. Come to the Cloud Tower when you have time. There's news from the headquarters. It seems that someone important is looking for you, so it shouldn't be anything bad. The teacher certificate I helped you with is real. Just use the normal method to directly enter the Cloud Tower. After saying our goodbyes, I suddenly paused in surprise at the final message that suddenly appeared behind me. However, the teleportation portal had already been activated, so I waved my hand to indicate that I already knew and that there was no need to say anything else. Take care, old man. Live for a few more years, and we'll meet again. I glanced at my companions in the purple teleportation portal. Amelia had long since prepared her luggage, and Heloise had conveniently taken all of Cade's candies. She was currently enjoying her next target. It seemed that they had long since been itching to go through the teleportation portal. Come on, let's go home. Chapter 237. Peace is so nice. I sat in a tea house in a public square and lightly sipped on some fragrant tea. I looked at the peaceful winter scenery before me. Since when did I have such a happy retired life? Ever since I returned to Definder, I was quite satisfied with my peaceful daily life. I didn't need to go to work, nor did I need to plan all those messy things. All I needed to do was sit and watch the sun rise and set. It was like a beautiful dream. Boom. Yep, it seemed that Gleena had arrived to participate in the celebration. So what if there was a slight explosion? Everyone had their own hobbies, and we needed to respect everyone's freedom. Capture that bastard! He actually dared to go even further than before. The group of naked men running past me was nothing. I had experienced it so many times in Sulphur Mountain City that I had long since gotten used to it. The new town security squad seemed to have gotten used to it as well, but I don't care about anyone else. But if the highest-ranking bishop says anything, Womian's reputation will be affected as well. It seems that I need to tell Lilith that during the celebration, that Tauren is to be imprisoned until he dies. Now that all the envoys have arrived, I can't let him continue to embarrass himself. How could such a small matter possibly stop me from continuing to laze around? I was in a good mood to relax. After doing my best to erase the scene from my memory, I poured myself another cup of tea and slowly enjoyed my peaceful life. And then, a group of naked men with wings floated past in the sky. Pooh! I looked at Eaglestorm and his brethren in a daze. Part of the transformation was a high-level drool technique. Weren't there more and more people who knew how to do this? When I looked closely, I discovered that there were actually quite a few black-winged people among them. They were Camderon's minions. I heard that Eaglestorm's drool sect has been very successful recently. Last time I saw the fairies report, they actually managed to snatch 2 seats at the Drool's Voice of Nature gathering and even had the right to speak. Eaglestorm is even hailed as the most outstanding theoretical reformer of the current generation. As expected, is there something wrong with the Drool's head? If this sect continues to expand, there will only be more and more winged people who don't wear clothes, and that's basically mental pollution. Let the town security know. You can also be targets for the air defense. Don't thank me, everyone has a responsibility to fight cults. Please call me X-Blade. I'm selling medicine, I'm selling secret alchemy potions. Whether it's for treatment or health, they're all effective. Dozens of gold-ranked alchemists worked together to create this potion. All the common potions were available, and they were sold at half price. What are you waiting for? As long as you can think of it, we have it here. Sex change agent? Super hair tonic? Peerless macho blue potion? Take a good look, it's the safety card. It's absolutely effective, absolutely safe. I looked at the gnome and his cart walking past me, as well as the familiar safety card from the BR brothers. Most importantly, I even saw the alchemy symbol of the miracle alchemist, Olivia. That was why, for the sake of Definder's citizens' safety and the next year's health and civilization evaluation, I unhesitatingly lowered my head and began writing a second letter of criticism. What? Why would someone with the symbol of the miracle alchemist have to be reported and banned? Olivia currently didn't have such a title. Her current title was Random Alchemist. The ingredients of her potions were random, their effects were random, and their targets were random. A single batch of alchemy products could have more than 10 different effects. Who would dare to touch such a thing? Mom, why doesn't that gnome have any fur? Don't look. Hurry up and leave. Alright then, I take back what I just said. At the very least, this acolyte had quite the professional ethic. At the very least, she used herself to test out the potion. Although this hair removal potion's effects were rather strong, it was indeed effective, wasn't it? Although having fur all over their bodies was basically the symbol of gnomes, and a hairless gnome was even more ridiculous than a hairless husky, her dedication was still commendable. I clearly drank a growth potion. As expected, growth potions and advertisements can't be trusted. Even though Olivia's mutterings were so close to me, I still added another case to my letter of criticism. I knew that this wasn't because Olivia wasn't skilled enough. In fact, it was the opposite. It was because she had too many ideas. She always liked to improve potion recipes and create new potion recipes. The end result was that many of these dangerous potions were produced. Normally speaking, such potions wouldn't be sold to outsiders. However, it was a pity that Olivia's teacher, Ingo Br, was a pure gnome. How could gnomes possibly waste such precious ingredients? Roland? Oh, I'm sorry, I mistook you for someone else. The person who suddenly walked by was a witch who was carrying a pot of unknown ingredients. Recently, she seemed to have become addicted to cooking. Since I had finally returned to the mortal plane, where there were so many ingredients, how could I possibly take the initiative to become the food god? Sister, are you looking for His Highness Roland? I saw that he went to the west of the city on horseback. He's probably out of the city. At this moment, I couldn't help but secretly rejoice at my own foresight. In order to successfully slack off and quietly become a handsome man, I took off the ring that lied about my age and used my true appearance to enjoy my vacation. Tsk, he escaped again. I clearly sensed that he was nearby. Little brother, did you eat lunch? I did. I'm already full since early in the morning. There were actually tentacles and eyeballs among the pot of unknown ingredient. At this time, anyone who wasn't an idiot would decisively refuse and furiously shake their head. However, that's perfect. I'm not afraid of vomiting on an empty stomach. Little brother, just treat it as my experiment. Try the lunch that I personally made. I spent so much time making it. It would be such a pity to waste it. I chuckled and then turned around to run. However, the vines beneath my feet instantly hung me up. She had actually long since predicted that I would run away. All right then, under the pressure of this terrifying witch and being tied up, in order to not expose my identity, my achievement as the god of food increased by 1. It was quite rare for me to be able to cook so much without dying every time. Ugh! Seafood and tangerine flavor. It's slightly stronger than last time's burnt rubber flavor, but it's limited. It's always different every time. How creative. But the strange thing was that even though Amelia clearly didn't capture her main target, she actually happily watched me eat after I finished eating. Then, she hummed a song as she cleaned up the dishes. In order to conquer a man, you must first conquer his stomach. Little brother, what do you think? Is it delicious? Obviously, her understanding of this classical maxim was quite a bit off. If conquer referred to killing and surrendering, then I felt that she had already achieved her goal. At the very least, my stomach had raised the white flag countless times already. All that was left was to give it a final cut. Beautiful sister, if I were your target, I would have already been completely conquered by your cooking. Next time, please directly give it to your target. Don't waste it on someone else. This wasn't because I wanted to make another achievement, nor was it because I didn't want to see Amelia's hard work go to waste. I simply didn't want to see anyone die. Even I, who had an inhuman physique, could be made half dead. If anyone else ate it, they would probably be poisoned and die. It seemed that my sarcastic suggestion was a bit too tactful, as Amelia actually smiled and nodded. It was evident that she was in a good mood. Yep, I won't give it to anyone else. All right then, I bid farewell to this sister, who was preparing to go to another dimension to collect ingredients for dinner. I seriously considered for several dozen seconds whether I should continue hiding like this or actually leave the city to seek refuge. However, I met with a new problem. Yet another group of Royal Knight ran past me. Their eyes were constantly scanning the crowd, obviously searching for someone. You still haven't found His Highness? Lady Kelly said that if we still can't find His Highness today, there's no need for us to go back. We'll have to go around the city for a 500-kilometer training. Envoys from various countries are here. So many major figures want to see His Highness Roland. Just what does His Highness Roland mean by this? The military also said that His Highness Roland has to personally discuss and prepare for the military parade. If we still can't find His Highness Roland, we're going to quit. Upon hearing this, I took out a special disguise item, a mystical pair of black-rimmed glasses. As long as I wore these glasses, I would be able to ignore anyone's face that was so close to me. Fine then, I was just making things up. I was just curious as to how it was possible for there to be so many misunderstandings in those epic stories. Lovers would simply wear a veil and a hat, Yet no one would be able to recognize each other, and they would end up killing each other. But right now, these traditional black-rimmed glasses were doubtlessly double insurance. And in order to increase my persuasiveness, I naturally couldn't miss out on those childish lollipops. But the strange thing was that when I put on the glasses and took out the lollipops, those night-knights actually started paying attention to me. Lady Eliza said that His Highness Roland might be disguised as a child. If you meet someone who notices you, he'll suddenly change his appearance, such as wearing a hat or wearing glasses. She also said that old fellows like to use lollipops to pretend to be young. If you see someone who's 11 or 12 years old still chewing on a lollipop, it should be him. What else could I say? I didn't say anything else as I turned around and ran. All right then, as soon as I ran, even if there wasn't a problem, it became a problem. Those newbie night-knights naturally chased after me, and as they chased after me, I ran into an empty alleyway. About 10 seconds later, I emerged from the entrance of the alleyway with a pile of metal cans lying on the ground behind me. Did you really think that I would be able to eat you? Before you go fishing, you should first think about how much weight your fishing rod can take. Didn't she tell you to be careful of your anger? Roland, huh? I couldn't help but sigh. Why am I always getting exposed? It seems like this disguise is completely useless. However, just as I was about to use my memory-erasing kick again, I saw a nightmarish figure. Little Rollo. All right, isn't the one who suddenly pounced over the fierce dog Momo, who had just finished her mission to settle down the refugees? Of course, there was also Diana, who was looking at me with a shocked expression. What else could I say? I continued running. I've had enough. I don't want to do anything before my birthday. No one can stop me from taking a vacation. Chapter 238. The current Donlon Principality was no longer the poor and weak Northland country it used to be. It had new citizens, new armies, new religions, and far too many other changes that caused this country's foundational structure to change drastically. The majority of its citizens were composed of the Northland humans and the Greyblood elves. There were no specific statistics on the ratio between the two, but even though there was a large difference in population, there shouldn't be a large difference in overall power level. After all, the former Tassel Kingdom was the strongest of the 4 Northland elf kingdoms, far more powerful than the weakest Donglon. The elves' individual power levels were also far higher than the humans, and their high-level combat strength and foundational power levels were also incomparable. In order to avoid the accumulation of conflicts from living together for a long period of time, I rejected all suggestions of convention and forced the two to live together. Perhaps this would cause friction and trouble at the very beginning, but it was far better than living on our own and constantly accumulating conflicts due to misunderstandings and differences. Then, under the influence of ambitious people and schemers, these conflicts would accumulate until they exploded. The people of the Mist were a product of many different ethnic groups. They were a cultural concept. Perhaps, as long as we dealt with this appropriately, it would be possible to achieve cultural recognition and form a single voice in the future. The Northland Principality was probably the only country in the Northland that had so many different ethnic groups. However, what was even more special was the unique structure of the country and dukedom. The original Donglon Principality was a dukedom rather than a kingdom because it had indeed borrowed the power of several mega-empires when it was first established. The previous king, Charles, was even the Grand Duke of the powerful Intanro Kingdom. He had even promised to become a vassal on the surface. Charles would use the identity of a pioneer knight to establish a new territory for a major country in order to obtain financial and military support. After becoming the ruler of a territory, he would then become a vassal of a major country. This was a common development path for newly established countries. However, Charles had an additional process. After Donglon successfully established itself, he tore apart the 10 vassal-vassal agreement. That's right, Charles had been lying from start to finish. he had actually simultaneously requested aid from more than 10 countries and declared himself a vassal. Of course, it was only later that they found out that those big countries had been fooled. But the result of the Shire stepping on more than a dozen boats was that, under the mutual checks and balances, no one got any benefit. Instead, the Donlon Principality became independent. In fact, the process was extremely complicated and arduous. The geographical advantage of being remote and poor also played a huge role. However, the side effect was that his reputation was ruined. Since the establishment of the Donlon Principality, it had not had a good reputation. Not only was it seen as a barbarian by the countries in the Central Plains, its credibility had also fallen to rock bottom. This was also the historical reason why the rulers were all kings and not Grand Duke. In fact, there were even 2 dukes in the Donlon Principality. However, the noble system in Donlon was basically unrelated to the Central Plains. It was not the first time that the Donlon Principality was treated as a barbarian's house game. However, in the feudal knight era, these nobles and domain lords had the heavy responsibility of protecting their citizens and territory. They were indeed the backbone of this country. But now, to me, in a way, they were obstructions. At the very least, my political orders had been obstructed more than once or twice. I knew that these people were difficult to deal with. They had all sorts of reasons and excuses, and the conflict between the central government and the local governments never ceased. Especially when I was consciously trying to reform the centralization of power, I became the target of everyone's attack. Every month, I would receive several complaints letters from the local domain lords to Renée, accusing me, of deceiving her and making life difficult for the people. This time, I arranged for the elves to live in the new city, the royal family's territory, and the territories of the prince's nobles. This caused quite a few major nobles to complain. After all, everyone knew that compared to their artworks and magical artifacts, the elves themselves were a great source of wealth. This was also why I didn't dare to completely disperse the elves. The ruler was far away, and the domain lords were the sky of their land. I couldn't expect every noble domain lord to have a high moral bottom line. If they caused a few more vicious incidents, the elves, who were already frightened by the mere twang of a bow, would become even more threatened. Any of my long-term goals would be ruined. However, this type of situation where the domain lords were the most powerful couldn't be dragged on forever. Perhaps it was because I was in Yongya or the underground world, so I was used to centralization of power. From the very start, I was quite dissatisfied with the feudal system. Back then, simply allowing the citizens to freely move about caused a huge backlash and resistance. This actually made me determined to reform the feudal system. However, I also knew that forcefully reforming the feudal system would affect the interests of all the nobles and domain lords, which would be no different from starting a civil war. That was why I could only slowly cook the frog over a slow fire, killing it slowly with a knife. The newly born Donlon Principality was a country that combined politics and religion. The god of law, Womians, was the national religion. In name, there were 2 highest leaders. One was Her Highness Renée, who wielded worldly power. The other was naturally Bishop Shueti, who wielded divine authority. Just thinking about how the highest leaders of this country were actually a naughty brat and a bastard who was constantly chased by the town security, I felt like having a heart attack. Yep, at this point, some of you probably already guessed how I intended to take back the local nobles' authority. The battle between divine authority and worldly power was endless, and the irresistible blade of divine authority could also make the local domain lords speechless. Since Womian's church was the national religion, wouldn't it be too much to establish a cathedral and branch church in every domain? Since the God of Law's teachings were recognized by the citizens, wouldn't it be too much to have the judge, justice knight, and incantation user spread their teachings all over Donlon? Since the God of Law's church's job class members were humble and skilled in battle, and they were well received and praised by society, then from a long-term perspective, it was necessary to expand the church's scale. It wouldn't be too much to recruit people in your own domain, would it? Since, with a series of since-s, there would definitely be one result as the Church of Law's local influence kept increasing. Since the God of Law's teachings state that everyone is equal under the law, it wouldn't be too much to have your head chopped off since you, a noble, have committed a serious crime. At that time, I, who wielded divine authority, would naturally be able to take back most worldly power and complete the centralization of power. In my plan, if the Mist Alliance was a gigantic giant, then Donglon would definitely be the giant's heart and fist. As the first country to recognize the God of Law as its national religion, as well as the headquarters of the God of Law's church, every change he made would be copied and copied by other countries. It would be impossible for me to not make it into the best model that I had in mind. With the development of new technology, civilian airships and engineering vehicles that travel between cities will become a reality sooner or later. Once transportation become convenient, then the mobilization of military forces will become convenient, and the suzerain's obligation to protect their citizens will be gone. Naturally, there will be no need for the system of one country per territory. Of course, I was still far from the day when my plan would be completely realized, but at least I had something to look forward to. All I needed to do was to sow the seeds and patiently wait for the day of harvest. Yep, it's definitely not that I want to slack off. But from a certain standpoint, my status was quite awkward. I was the nominal ancestor of Donglon. In that case, my status should be higher than that of the current ruler. Of course, this didn't include actual authority. After all, the previous emperors in history had all stopped doing anything. If they still wanted to do something major after they abdicated, then the country wouldn't be far from chaos. That was why I was in a rather awkward position when it came to worldly royal authority. From a certain standpoint, any subject who pledged loyalty to me would be a traitor to the current ruler. Fortunately, Renée trusted me completely and even gave me the status of Queen's teacher. She also supported me in all aspects, so I wouldn't be too embarrassed when it came to royal authority. However, this was still a problem. After all, people would change. Even if Renée maintained her trust in me, her subordinates would have their own thoughts and interests. Not only that, Renée would eventually get married and have children. You're overthinking things. And there would also come a day when she would abdicate. When considering the future ruler's attitude towards me, I needed to make plans as soon as possible. At the very least, I had no intention of interfering with the internal affairs of the royal court. I also expressed that I didn't intend to get involved in this area. And in terms of divine authority, my status was as awkward as ever. I had the status of Wumian's God Envoy, which meant that I represented Wumian's will. However, I didn't return to the divine kingdom like the other God Envoys. Instead, I stayed on the surface. In a certain sense, my responsibilities overlapped with the highest bishop of the Church of Law. He was the highest leader of the Church of Law, the representative of the true God on the surface. I was also the representative of the true God's will. If there were two representatives, fine, why was I always in such an awkward position? But since I was the one who brought Shuedi out, the current higher-ups of the Church of Law were all my people. At the very least, there wouldn't be any problems in the short term. As for when the higher-ups of the Church of Law were replaced, due to my relationship with Wumian's, there wouldn't be any problems. Wumian's was the core of my plan. How could I allow anything to happen to him? As for military authority, my status was even more awkward. With the establishment of countless new armies, the original system of Royal Knight Squadron and City Defense Army was obviously no longer suitable. Donglon established a new military department to coordinate the military affairs of the entire country. Yes, the entire country, including the various domain lords. There was no need to carry out these schemes that were bound to cause strife. Even in the current military department, my status was quite awkward. In this generation, there was no such thing as a separation between the military and the government. The highest leader of the country's military was definitely the royal authority. Renée was the monarch, and the military department was an organization that served her. As the highest leader of the military department in name, I was also the representative of the royal authority. Alright, I knew that it was troublesome to act as a representative, but the people of this generation loved to talk about such things. If it didn't conform to the laws and the unwritten rules between nobles, there would be no authority. Without authority, the people below them would play all sorts of tricks to disobey orders, and they wouldn't be able to do anything. That's why I hate these blockheads from the primitive era. They're so troublesome. Back to the main topic. The situation of the military department was no different from that of the government. Renée was the one who held power in name, but because the newly established armies were all in the hands of the Night Squadron under me, and I was her representative, all the generals had to listen to my orders. This meant that the military department was basically in my hands. This was obviously quite abnormal, but what was even more abnormal was that everyone felt that this was only natural. The final conclusion was that although my identity was quite embarrassing, from a certain standpoint, I was the number one person in Donglan. This was rather similar to Sulphur Mountain City back in the day. Adam and Little Red didn't do much, and Marguerite was already having a hard time managing the daily affairs. In the end, I, the prisoner, was the one who was truly in charge. However, this type of system was obviously not what I wanted. I had many things to do myself, and there would be quite a few trips in the future. It was quite possible that I wouldn't be around for a long period of time. If they really developed some sort of dependence on me, it would be quite troublesome in the future. That was why I had to voluntarily disappear in order to cultivate their initiative and sense of responsibility, to the point where it didn't matter if I was around or not. After saying so much, is it still just to find an excuse for yourself to be lazy? Since you know that you'll probably be quite busy in the future, can't you show off your rare diligence for now? Your office is already filled to the brim with documents, and the living room and kitchen are both full. Where did your sense of responsibility and initiative go? Since our hearts were connected through a magical pet contract, I would have to take this silly cat with me even if I had to escape. This was probably the source of my unhappiness. Don't listen to Heloise's nonsense. I wasn't doing this because I wanted to slack off. I was doing this to train my subordinates' abilities so that they could be independent as soon as possible. Train your subordinates' hide-and-seek abilities? You still haven't found His Highness Roland? The town security squad just reported back, but now he's gone again. Damn it, His Highness actually went to hide there. Now, another squad of Night Knights had passed by. They actually used a Royal Night Knight on a personal mission to find Roland. This was using public power for personal gain. This was too ridiculous. I was definitely going to scold them when I returned. You actually have the cheek to scold others? If you obediently stayed in your office, how much administrative costs would you have saved? Silly cat, shut up. Otherwise, I'm going to make every meal you have become dog biscuit. Do you believe that I'll find a chance to transform into your appearance and shout, "I'm Roland"? Then, I'll do a square dance while singing Little Apple? It'll even be an old folk dance version. I instantly shuddered as I imagined such a frightening scene. I surrender. Please don't do it. Considering how shameless Heloise was in no way inferior to me in shamelessness, the result would definitely be a lose-lose situation for both of us, so I immediately gave in. That's more like it. Right, I think there's a merchant group from the Eris Kingdom in the southern part of the city. Their pickled cabbage candy is quite famous. Why don't you go and try it? Right, there's also an Asiluo opera troupe at 3 in the afternoon. Their ace singers and main dancers are all elves. Alright then, her intentions were quite obvious. She was basically asking for a bribe. Let's go, we're going to book the tickets right now. Wherever I went to slack off, wherever I went on vacation was the same. Since it was all the same, I might as well go along with her.